Hello, today on my channel you will hear an amazing story about life. I hope you enjoy this story. This one struck me to the core. Honestly, I still can't forget it. Enjoy watching.
"Hey man, stop," Andrew called out to a man in an expensive foreign car. It was a cool fall evening. It was getting dark. Andrew could barely walk after a hard day's work. He worked part-time at the market as a laborer. It was the trading post of an acquaintance of Eden's. He helped Andrew in his time of need by getting him a job there. Andrew also had an old house for demolition, which stood alone near the river by the bank. The house had long since been declared a wreck. The roof had sagged in two places. The walls were painted, as they used to be, up to the middle. Grandma had painted it white from then on. Andrew's mom didn't live long. He was left an orphan early on, and everything went wrong from there. He just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. He did time for the company. Then there was nothing to do. No job, no opportunity to study. Loneliness and the feeling that this world did not accept him soaked Andrew completely. Now he was just walking down the street, glad that soon the day would be over and he could fall into a peaceful sleep, forgetting about reality at least for a few hours. "Did you want something?" Andrew asked. He wasn't used to being approached by people like this. The man in the car was smooth-shaven. His hair slicked back, smeared with gel. He was wearing a black shirt, 2 buttons undone. And the cabin reeked of strong marine perfume. "Listen, I need to move one thing out of my house. An antique dresser. I'll pay you extra if you do it today. I promised mine a week ago, and she's flying in from Dubai today. If she sees this junk still in the house, I'll be in trouble." The man in the car smiled ironically. "Take it out where?" "Anywhere you want. You want it to the nearest dumpster. Maybe someone will need it. You just gotta haul it, you know. And don't scratch the parquet, of course. I don't have time to hire movers. I'm on my way to pick her up at the airport now." Andrew noticed that on the front seat of the car there was a gorgeous bouquet, apparently for an equally gorgeous woman. People live, he thought. And why is it that some people get everything and others get nothing? "All right, I can, of course." "Get in, then." The car stopped. Andrew sat in the back seat, noting that it was the first time he'd been in such an expensive car. "Who needs old junk? We should just get it out of the house. Like my girlfriend says, it makes her sad. It smells old. You can sell it, do whatever you want. It's all yours." Pulling up to the private home, Andrew marveled again at how luxuriously some people could live when he entered the hall. The rich man pointed to the antique furniture that clearly didn't fit in with the modern glossy ceramic interior. "I should get going now. Man, not in service but in friendship. I'll leave the keys with you. You throw them under the mat later." "Okay." "Aren't you afraid I'll steal something? You picked me up off the street?" Andrew asked. The rich man grinned and pulled a crumpled 500 rubles out of his pocket. "Here's your earnings." "Hey, thought I had some major cash." "It's all on the card." "Okay, that's enough, I guess." Andrew nodded modestly, accepting the payment. "I've got cameras everywhere, so I'm not afraid." "Oh, and you seem like a normal guy to me." "Thanks, buddy. See you later." The rich man almost ran back to the car. Andrew thought he must be very happy. He must be in such a hurry to see his wife. Suddenly there was a shout from inside the house. Help, it was a distinct female cry. Andrew thought there was someone inside. He rushed upstairs. He had to figure out who needed help in here. Maybe the maid had fallen down the stairs while hanging the curtains. Well, what else could it be? He ran into the room on the second floor from which the sound was coming and was dazed. By the large bed lay a very pale woman. She was lying on her stomach and waving her arms helplessly. "What's wrong?" Andrew flew over to her and helped her lie down on the bed. "I have an injury. My legs won't listen. I think I'm going to die soon," she said, barely breathing. Andrew noticed that the woman was still young, just over 30. She had black hair just below her shoulders, crescent black eyebrows, and plump lips. Her pallor made her even more expressive. Large eyes literally bore into Andrew's. And I thought no one was in the house. My landlord let me in. He began to justify himself. "I see. The husband." "Wait, what husband?" "That man in the black shirt." Andrew began to describe him. "How could he be her husband if he went to meet his bunny?" "Yeah, we live alone. No one else is here. This is my husband. He's doing the renovations. I'm dying. I know he's with someone else. They can't wait to bury me, throw all my stuff away, and get married. You know, Nabu has always been an Alfonso. Before me, he dated a woman in her 50s, and he wasn't even 30 at the time. Gambled away all my money, ruined the business. I can't even get an operation. They don't do that here. I have to go to New York, and I don't have any money. If you sold this house, this car, wouldn't you have enough money?" Andrew asked. She looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry I scared you. I also loaded you up with my problems. The money might be found. Only Nabu doesn't want it. He says I'll live with this disease for the rest of my life, and the operation could kill me, but I'm getting worse. I know I'm going to die. And that's all he wants. It's like I'm out of business. He took the business the first time I went into surgery. Then there were more surgeries, but nothing worked. It looks like another one is needed, but a very expensive one. It seems to me that after it I could live a full life until I was 100 years old. At least that's what the doctors say. And of course, there are always risks. But Nabu said there's no money, and why risk it? He's had a mistress for a long time, and my neighbor comes to see me 3 times a day. He hired her to watch me. That's how it is. And I married him when I was a rich heiress. Nabu found someone else and no one cares about me. I fell. And if it hadn't been for you, I think I'd be lying there until the neighbor comes. And she'll be here in the morning." Andrew felt sorry for her. She was a real skeleton in the rich man's closet. "My name is Andrew." "Kira, why did you fall down? Were you trying to grab something off the nightstand?" Andrew handed her a glass and she drank it greedily. The guy took a closer look at her and noticed that she was pretty enough. It was as if her eyes were smiling despite her illness. "You'll forgive me, of course, but your husband is just a horrible person. You can't treat your loved ones like that. You'd better tell me, what did he ask you to do? Why are you even here?" "He asked me to take out the dresser." Tears spurted from her eyes. What is it?" Andrew asked. "This dresser was made by my father with his own hands. It's dear to me as a memory. What does it matter anymore, though? You just take care of it, okay?" Andrew nodded. He asked if he needed anything else, and when he didn't, he went to the dresser. It was a good one, and it took a lot of effort to get it out of the house. Next, Andrew called his neighbor. He was a boozer, and he was flattered by the money. I had to give him the very 500 rubles that the rich man had paid. 2 hours later, the chest of drawers stood in a small room. It occupied the empty place by the wall where the closet used to be. Andrew had gotten rid of it not so long ago, as it was completely decayed. The next day, he set about cleaning the dresser. He decided to put dishes and other things in it, checking the shelves. Discovered that one of them wasn't attached like the others, it slid out. Andrew pulled it out to wipe the dust behind it. And to his surprise, found that there was a hole inside, and out of it right into his hands fell documents folded in half. They had a lot of stamps on them, signatures. Everything looked very serious. Some of the papers were in English. It was about a company, a will in Kira's name. Apparently, it was the same dying mistress. Andrew was in a hurry to get to work at the market and decided to take the documents with him. And after work, he stopped by Eden, his acquaintance, and showed the find. I don't all understand what these are. They're important documents and should be returned to the mistress. Or maybe something like a long-expired warranty on a refrigerator. Andrew's friend was a man of literacy. He put on his glasses and read the papers. This went on for about half an hour. Andrew was getting bored by now. "Buddy, these are important papers. If you don't need them, I'd keep them." Andrew frowned. They didn't belong to him, after all. He couldn't just gift them. Besides, he knew Eden too well. If he wanted to keep them, then the papers were really valuable. "No, I'm sorry, I need them back. They're not mine after all." Eden nodded, shrugged. As he took the papers, Andrew felt his companion crumple, as if he didn't want to give them back. I had to pull them out of his hands. Andrew said goodbye and went on his way. But just as he was leaving, Eden caught up with him. "Wait, you're not going to get hurt. Say you lost them, and sell them to me for good money, 100,000. Buy yourself whatever you want." Andrew raised his eyebrows. "No, I told you you have to give it back. There's a situation there that you can't do otherwise. They could save a man's life. I'm sorry, I can't." Eden nodded. "Okay, that's okay. See you later." They shook hands and said goodbye. Andrew felt a little scared. He wasn't intimately acquainted with Eden, and he'd heard that he was capable of terrible things. If these papers were so valuable that he was willing to pay 100,000 for them, they probably weren't worth carrying home. It occurred to Andrew that his shack might be broken into while he was away. So he walked into the park on his way out. He went to a tree that stood just outside the exit and slipped the documents carefully into the hollow. It was deep. A squirrel used to live there, but it hadn't been seen for a year. The hollow was big enough to put the folded papers inside. I don't think anyone would be coming in here anytime soon, and if they did, they'd probably be in possession of some pretty serious documents. Well, Andrew realized he had no other option. How to secure this find? There were no friends or acquaintances he could trust with such a thing, and his house wasn't even locked. Andrew was barely making ends meet, and there was nothing to take from him. Until this afternoon. Toward evening, when he'd already turned out the lights, there was a knock at the door. "What do you want?" he asked gruffly, without opening it. "My good man, we've come to pick up some papers. A man needs them. Here's a tenner for you, 10,000. Give me the papers, and we'll part in peace. If you don't give it to me nicely, we'll find it and take it anyway. So you'll be beaten sad, without money, and without papers." Andrew realized he couldn't get away from Eden. It doesn't matter, we're after the papers. And they don't belong to you. Give them back. So let's not get on each other's nerves. Andrew went out on the porch and saw 4 big guys coming to visit him. They put money in his hand and looked at him expectantly. But I gave the papers back to the owner, Andrew explained. I don't have them. We'll find them anyway. We'll even tear up the floors of your shack. You give it to me. Andrew sighed and moved away from the door, letting the uninvited guests into the house. Well, that's a bad way to do it. One of them went inside. The other started hitting Andrew. He tried to resist, but it was no use. 2 of them held him down, the others hit him, broke his finger. But Andrew kept saying there were no documents. The house was turned upside down. They weren't kidding when they said they were going to tear the floorboards off. The floors had been ripped up. Not all of them, of course, but in places. The whole thing went on for a couple hours. Boy, God be with you. Come on, guys. He's got nothing. So he really did. Andrew could barely move his finger. You couldn't touch it. Andrew washed it himself, screaming in pain, and wrapped it in bandages. He washed his face, washed the blood off, and went to bed. There was no strength for anything. He hadn't expected this from Eden. He'd have to find a new job. He didn't want to be associated with such a rotten man. He spent the next day in pain, finally going to a place where they put a cast on his broken finger. Spent 3 hours there. Are you going to write a statement? Asked the doctor, seeing perfectly well that the guy had been beaten up. No, I won't. What if they come back? No, Andrew answered, not understanding the question. He went straight to the park, got the documents, and, looking around, went to the rich man's house. It warmed his soul to think that yesterday's bandits in a fit of cruelty had forgotten to take the money, and Andrew had a tenner left on his hands, with which he was going to buy clothes and food. Plus, it would be possible to pay the utilities a little up front. He did this because he was often sick in the winter and couldn't work, and the bills were just too much for his pocket. Andrew arrived at the rich man's house. He didn't dare to go inside. What if it was he, not Eden, who hired the bandits? The thought was wandering through his mind, but he was almost certain that Eden had done it. In the end, he waited for over an hour. When his host left, Andrew quietly crept into the house through the only open window, sneaking in like a thief and quietly entering Kira's bedroom. She was asleep or dozing, but the sound of the door opening roused her. "What are you doing here?" She was startled. The woman looked even worse. Her illness must have weakened her. "I brought you something. I found it in the very chest of drawers I was given. You told me my father made it. There are some very valuable papers in there. Maybe they'll let you do the surgery." Kira frowned and began to study the documents. She was an educated person, knew 3 languages, and easily understood what was in front of her. My God. My mom and I couldn't figure out where my father was investing his money. We'd forgotten about it. He was rich. When he died, all he left behind was this house and the company. But there was obviously more money. That's where it was. And that's why he always told me to keep this dresser and keep it clean. Kira continued. I knew I'd find the papers. He always had a lot of enemies, and he was afraid to advertise that he was so rich. Even his will didn't reflect the whole truth. Here they are. My God, that's a lot of money. And it's already here. All that's left is to cash it in. Andrew smiled. So that's great. Well, I'm glad your business is going to go up. Okay, I'll be on my way. It seemed like he was an extra around here now. Oh well. First of all, thank you, because you could have kept it all. With a lawyer, you can easily withdraw that money. It's all in here. But you brought it to me. It's the kind of decency that surprises people these days. It's perfectly normal, Kira smiled. Right, but thanks anyway, Andrew replied. What's the second thing? He asked. Secondly, I need your help. My husband will just take everything for himself and drive me away. I need to run, but I can't. Well, if you want, let me take you. There's a hotel in town where you can get a cheap room in someone else's name. They don't ask for a passport. If you want, I'll take you there and keep an eye on you. Then you can withdraw the money and finally go to the clinic. Yeah, that's a good idea. You'd be a lifesaver. But I can't go by myself, and I don't have any money yet. I'll have some. Andrew smiled. Kira's muscles tensed. Did you feel like you got beat up? Did something happen? Andrew said that first he showed the papers to a comrade, and he sent bandits for his soul. You're a hero. Really. That's not just common decency anymore. You sacrificed yourself. You know, I won't be in your debt, honestly. Oh, come on. I'm not here to ask for a handout. I'm here to help a man in need. And that's not heroic. Although I can see why you're surprised. Your husband, by all accounts, is not a very decent man. He's not, she said. Andrew helped her up. He gathered up the things she pointed out. It turned out to be 2 heavy bags. But Kira took everything she needed. She wrote a note to her husband saying she was leaving for the hospice, didn't want to get in the way of building a new life for him, and asked him not to look for her. He had to buy it. Half an hour later, Kira walked into the hotel with Andrew. They introduced themselves as husband and wife. Andrew explained that his spouse was ill and he would be taking care of her. Said that he was passing through town and had invented a beautiful and creative profession as sculptor. Nobody knows famous sculptors by sight, and creative people often look unpleasant. It's inherent in their personality. So Andrew's scruffy appearance didn't arouse suspicion. They chatted sweetly with the concierge and were soon alone in the room. There's no one to look after you now. Do you want me to stay? He asked. It was awkward. He only now realized that she needed care. He needed to help her go to the bathroom, take a shower. It's nothing. I'll try to do it myself. No, I'll stay, he said seriously. They talked about life all evening. Andrew talked about his mother, about how hard it had been without her. And suddenly he realized that he was very lonely. And so was Kira. Her parents were long gone. Laurel had gotten involved with the wrong man in search of intimacy and now had to suffer for her choice. They had married Nabu, and she'd had health problems afterward. One surgery, another. In the end, in the 4 years, while the business was completely in his hands, they lost all income. They had to lay off employees and sell the office. Now, what was left of the business was just making ends meet. When the doctors said they could do a surgery that would normalize everything, I was happy. I was so tired of this medicine. What's wrong with you? Andrew asked. Is it something with your thyroid? I don't want to bore you with the details. but there is a way to get back to normal. If I have time, if it's not too late. Nabu flatly refused, said it was dangerous. He wanted children, and this operation, if unsuccessful, could put me off childbirth. And besides, there's always the possibility that I might not survive the operation. Yeah, anesthesia's a risk. But you're still ready? I'm ready for anything. I want to live. He took her hand. A complete stranger, a casual acquaintance, suddenly became so close. They spent the next 5 days together. Andrew bought her a cell phone, paid for her hotel out of his own money, brought her food. Meanwhile, Kira found a lawyer who helped her cash out some of the money. Once she had the money in hand, she decided to help Andrew. After all, he had told her the conditions in which he lived almost on the street, in an emergency house that could collapse any day. She realized that she had to help him, but she didn't know how he wouldn't take money. In the end, she paid him for the room she lived in for 2 months in advance. It included 3 meals a day. I also made a card in his name and put a considerable amount of money on it. Don't scold me, please. Tomorrow I'm leaving for the capital. I've already arranged everything. I left you something here. You spent the last of it on me. I don't know where you got it when you weren't working. I want you to have a roof over your head, to be warm and fed. And this card, the money on it, is yours. I know it's inconvenient for you, but please take it, because I owe you. Andrew shook his head. Oh, come on. I'm not taking anything from you. Listen to me. I'm going to have major surgery, and I'd be worried if I knew you were back in a wreck. You can't do that. The doctors don't recommend it, and you're practically living on the street. Kira hugged him. Andrew didn't say anything. He just didn't know how to react. Money, of course, in his situation was not superfluous, but he did not want to take it. It was hard to refuse now, so he just kept silent. The cab will be here soon. I need you to help me get there, she smiled. And he suddenly realized that Kira was far more attractive than any woman he'd ever met. She was wearing no makeup, no clothes. Okay, we'll talk about it when you get back, but I'm not taking the money. Although since you paid for the room, I think I'll stay here. That's fine. He put her on a plane and went back to the hotel. It was empty without her. Kira called tonight. Can you imagine not having surgery? I was told I could try medication. It's more expensive, but it should help. And if it doesn't, I'll have to go under the knife. But that's great. Are the meds just temporary? No, the therapy should normalize the hormones. You just have to monitor it afterward. I had a rare pathology. It took the doctors a long time to figure out what was going on. And the hormones caused other problems with my body. I'm in poor health. But I think I'm going to live. Andrew smiled. He had heard that Kira was no longer burying herself. The first time he saw her, she had spoken to him like she was doomed. He had even thought then that she had cancer. Her disease was actually treatable. I'm very happy and I'm waiting for you. Come back soon. I think I'll work here for 10 days. And if they see that the pills are working, they'll let me go home. And if they don't, we'll think about surgery. For the next 10 days, Kira and Andrew talked on the phone for hours. They missed each other, talking about silly things, movies and politics, talking about everything and nothing, like teenagers. And on the 10th day, Kira announced she was coming back. The medication had helped. She could already walk on her own. and she had the strength to live. Andrew met her at the airport and saw that she had changed, and she was even more attractive. She was wearing little makeup. She had bought new clothes, gone to a beauty salon. "You look great," he said. Andrew himself did not sit idle all this time either. He found a part-time job in another market, away from Eden and his thugs, and earned money for new clothes. Living in a hotel room, he didn't have to spend much on food. He cut his hair, bought new razors, and started to look different too. Women even started looking at him. Andrew was handsome. The day Kira arrived, they finally confessed their affection for each other. They spent 24 hours in each other's arms, and then Kira filed for divorce. That same night, she got a call from Naboo. "What's a divorce? You said you went to the hospice to die?" Naboo was surprised. Kira didn't realize he had a mistress hanging on his shoulder at that moment. Capricious blonde Stella, or whatever he called her. Bunny. "What's it to you? Is that all you wanted? It doesn't matter. Wait, you're not dying? It's just that the doctors told me, God, you're a terrible person. No, I'm not dying. And I'm divorcing you. Where did you even get this number? I'll run it through my contacts. Please don't call me again. You have a mistress? Stay with her. I thought you were going to die. It was hard for me. Please understand me. Maybe I don't want a divorce, but I do." Kira hung up. Wow, what revelations. He lied to her that she wasn't going to die, she thought. Naboo had a serious conversation at that very moment. "You don't want a divorce. What are you talking about?" The blonde pouted her lips. "Stella, honey, I just didn't want to divide the property. This house was given to her by her parents. The court will leave it to her, and the company's almost defunct. I mean, we'd be left with nothing. It's not good for us. Maybe she'll die after all. We just have to drag out the divorce." I tried to talk her out of it. At that moment, Stella felt she might lose him, and he was still very attractive in her eyes. That's good, because soon there will be 3 of us. What Naboo was surprised. He stared at her with blue eyes, not knowing how to react. "I'm pregnant. I didn't want to tell you, but I thought you should know. It's still small, but the ultrasound confirmed it. I'm in my first semester." "It's called a trimester," he corrected her and hugged her gently. Naboo dreamed of children. He made Kira undergo a course of drug therapy, and when they realized they couldn't make it work, after that they started malfunctioning. Apparently, hormone therapy provoked a number of changes in an already unhealthy body. It triggered or simply exacerbated a pre-existing problem. But from that point on, things went downhill for her. And it was no longer about getting pregnant. At some point, Kira got better and they both got tested. But before they got the results, Kira collapsed, almost died. She hit her head, got an intracranial hematoma, and had surgery. Naboo was very worried at the time. After the surgery, she was further examined and found to have problems with her endocrine system. The doctors started talking about the need for treatment. One illness triggered another. In the end, she only got worse. When the doctors said that she might die and that surgery was too expensive, Naboo just accepted it. That's when he got Stella. The divorce proceedings had a lot of complications. Naboo put it off as long as he could. But seeing Kira standing upright and on her own 2 feet, he realized he shouldn't get his hopes up anymore. He wanted to talk to her, to find out what had happened and how. So she was on the mend. To that end, he suggested a meeting. Kira came to the meeting and told him that she had found a cure. Without going into details, only clarified that he himself was the reason for her recovery. "How so?" Nabu asked. "You decided to throw away the dresser. If I hadn't touched it, I might not be here anymore. But you hired a man to take it out. And in that very moment, my fate changed." "Was there something in the dresser?" Nabu guessed. "That's none of your business. Tomorrow we'll divide everything up. It will be the final hearing. And I'll finally be free of you." Nabu felt hurt that she was so happy and he wasn't. Stella was pushing him, saying she wanted a lavish wedding dress, even though Nabu hadn't even proposed to her. In the courtroom, Kira honestly told what horror she experienced, hearing that in the next room her husband is having fun with another. Under those circumstances, the court should definitely find that the spouse hardly deserved to get anything. Nabu realized he was about to be left holding his nose and took the floor. "Yes, I met someone, but I always kept an eye on my wife and her nurse. I'm a human being too. I have needs for love and care too. And it's not my fault that I fell hard in love with someone else, but I didn't dare leave my dying wife. Those are the circumstances. I'm sorry you heard everything. But I didn't think it would turn out this way," he said fidgetily. "And now we're expecting a baby. I just want a divorce. And let them judge us fairly." "You can't have children," Kira said. "Nabu, when did we get tested?" "The doctor sent me the results. I wasn't well at the time. I had an operation and I forgot to tell you. We never talked about it again. You're infertile. So if I were you, I'd check with my mistress to find out who the father is." Stella wasn't in the courtroom. The judge sighed as she looked at Nabu. And soon the verdict was in. Nabu got the crumbs, in fact, only what he had earned himself. Everything was left to Kira. Back home, Nabu had a drink. Stella came home late at night, and she smelled of alcohol too. Me and my girlfriends had a drink. I had a couple of drinks, honestly. It won't harm the baby. Pregnant women can have a little alcohol. Don't worry about it, she said. You know what? I am infertile, he said. His words came out of the blue. It was followed by a dead silence. Stella stood still and then sat down quietly beside him. And I didn't know whose baby it was. Was it? No baby. I thought I was pregnant, but I wasn't. I didn't want to upset you later. I thought I could still get pregnant. You wanted a baby so badly, didn't you? Nabu realized it was all a deception. She had originally just wanted his money. She wanted him to provide for her. I see. But pack your things. I don't want to see you again, he said. Stella raised her head proudly. She packed up and left in a cab. But she hoped he'd come to his senses. At that time, Kira and Andrew moved together into a small apartment in the center of the city. Kira soon sold the house and used the money to buy a new place. The most difficult memories were connected with that house: the death of her parents, her illness, and thoughts of her imminent demise. She decided to start over, and Andrew proposed to her, and she was about to take his last name. She was preparing to become Kira Johnson, looking for a dress. Andrew, on the other hand, was working at her new company, which she'd started not too long ago. She was feeling much better, so she went into business for herself. Unlike Nabu, Kira knew how to run a business. She was the only child in the family, and her father had accustomed her to labor, taught her all the basics. So she started a company, hired old employees, the most loyal ones she'd known for years. She had a lot of connections, from the fire department to the marketplace. So things picked up pretty quickly. However, she was still undergoing treatment and was now able to exercise. She had more strength, but the treatment continued. And Kira took care of herself, shifting some of her responsibilities to Andrew. He began to wear business suits and realized that they suited him very well. The job was going well. He easily found a common language with people because he looked great in expensive suits, communicated with everyone as a simple man, wise in life, kind and understanding. Everyone loved him. In the new firm, Kira, looking at him, realized that she was not mistaken. She was in love. A couple months later, there was a knock on her door. Stella came to her. "You don't know me," she began. "I've come to talk about Andrew. I call him Nicholson. That's the way I like to say it. I'm sorry." Kira smiled incomprehensibly. "What did you want?" she asked. "I came to tell you that I had an affair with your husband a couple weeks ago. We only spent 2 hours together and he left me for you. He said he loved you. So you take care of him. And I've come to tell you that I've lost and I'm leaving for good." Stella walked away, leaving Kira feeling confused. She was tired of waiting for Nabu to come back and decided to take one last shot at the one who had caused the whole thing to fall apart. She couldn't just leave it at that. She should have told him he was infertile. What did she care? He didn't know. And they weren't getting a divorce. Stella saw everything as Nabu's ex-wife. When she realized it was over, she decided to get revenge. Thankfully, Kira had never seen her husband's mistress. She was bedridden, but telling her all this. Stella went to celebrate her victory. Let her be alone, but her rival wouldn't be happy either. Kira, on the other hand, just sat down on the couch and began to reminisce. Andrew had stayed late at work twice. Right around the time she'd said, "So it's true," Kira started to think she saw a chill on his part. He was turning away from the wall, citing a cold. Was he afraid of infecting her, or was he ashamed of cheating on her? What did she know about him anyway? They trusted each other blindly. Kira could barely wait for him to come over and spilled everything the blonde had told her to him in a heartbeat. "I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't have anyone else, just you. I mean, why would I want someone else? It never even crossed my mind. I love you," he said. "Just admit it, please. I promise to think about forgiving you." "Why would you trust a stranger and not me? Have I given you a reason not to trust me?" Andrew was getting angry. What's going on? Some girl just told her all this crap. "I don't know you," she said. She was scared. Having married Nabu at one time, it seemed like forever. She had trusted him, and when she heard he was with another right behind the wall when she was in this state, she wanted to die. Of course it hadn't gone away. And now Laurel began to doubt everyone, didn't trust anyone anymore. "You better think about why she came here and told you everything. Maybe you have enemies. Maybe it's the competition. We have beaten a lot of people in our business." He tried to smooth out the sharp edges, but Kira could not contain herself. She cried. "It's you. You're like all of them. Like Nabu. Go away. I will never forgive you. You didn't even have the courage to admit it. I hate you all." Andrew turned and walked away in what he was wearing. He had his work briefcase with him. In it was a charger, a phone, and some cash. He used the money to buy some food and went to his old apartment, opened the door and walked in. How long had he not been here? Over 6 months. It wasn't so cold outside the window now, but he turned on the heat anyway. Soon it was warm. Walking around in his suit was uncomfortable, so he went into his closet. There were some of his old tattered clothes. Andrew changed and stood in front of the mirror. He looked better now, neatly cut, smoothly shaved. Who are you kidding? You're practically homeless. What kind of businessman are you? Kira. You can't pull her off. They threw you out like a kitten. Maybe nobody said anything to her. She's just sick of you. Rich people are different. They don't understand people like you. And they'll never understand you, he said to his reflection in the mirror. It was painful and hurtful. He wanted to cry. He missed her, but he pulled himself together. The next day he went to look for a job. There was almost no money left, but he found nothing, neither that day nor the next. And when the hunger made him dizzy, Andrew went to Eden's market. You came back? I knew you'd come back, Eden said. Need a job? I'm good at it, you know, Andrew asked. It was sickening to look at him. His finger had healed, but it still hurt. I know. All right, you'll go to the tents at the east wall. There's no one to work there, Eden looked at him with contempt and left. He gave him the stalls with heavy goods. Unloading them was a sweat, and if it was cold, it was an instant cold. There was also the danger of breaking your back. Andrew had been unloading goods there for a week. It was raining that day. He kept thinking of Kira, remembering her, and it hurt. And all the pain he was feeling was in his muscles. Eventually, towards evening, he did get a fever. Eden didn't cheat on the money, and that was good. But he looked at him like a dog, and he wasn't even ashamed. The next day, Andrew warned that he was sick. Who's going to work? Need a job? Come or be fired. I'll come, Andrew replied through clenched teeth. He worked all day with a fever. After getting the money, he went home, but he felt sick. He sat down on a bench at the bus stop and dozed off. The fever was very high. Everything on his legs hurt from the day's work. It seemed that now he would just fall down and never wake up again. He had chills. He wanted to get warm, but he had no strength to get up. An hour later, a woman approached him. She was young and had a very friendly, shaggy dog on a leash. And next to her was a small child who looked a lot like her mother. The high fever made it seem like Kira was next to him. The woman looked just like her. Kira, you're here. I'm sick. Should I call an ambulance? Are you very sick? Yes, without you. The stranger felt that he didn't smell of alcohol, only of Zvezdotka. It was his only medicine that day. I'll call an ambulance. I think you have a fever. That's when Andrew realized he was looking at an unknown woman. Don't call. Let me die. I don't want to live like this anymore. I've been chased away like a dog, accused of something I didn't do, abandoned and betrayed. You wouldn't want to live if someone did that to you, would you? She smiled. I would. I have a son, Jack is our dog, but how would they be without me? Surely you must have someone worth living for. Andrew shook his head. There is no one else. There was only one Karochka. You know, she even wanted to take my last name. and we never got married. The stranger still called the doctors and asked what hospital they would take him to. The next day, she went to his house and brought him oranges. He was getting worse. The doctors were prepping him for surgery. "You can come in, but not for long," said an older, serious nurse. Ciara frowned. She took Peter to daycare and stopped by the hospital to check on the rescued man. She thought he seemed very lonely and wanted to talk to him, maybe help him in some way. She didn't want him to do something irreparable out of loneliness. Ciara didn't usually do that. But seeing him, for some reason she felt very sorry for him. Ciara entered the room, and Andrew thought for a second that it was Ciara again. "God, you look just like her," he said, and it hurt inside. Andrew could barely breathe. He was very weak. "I came to see you. You gave me a big scare last night when you said you didn't want to live. You're young, you'll get better. If you need help, you can have my phone number. I can help you with a job. I don't have much money. I work as an elementary school teacher. But if you need medicine, I'll help and feed you. You know, it's not pity. It's just that I've had a hard time, too. My husband left me alone with a baby. He was only 4 months old. I grew up in an orphanage. My parents abandoned me, and I'm all alone in the world, too." Andrew listened to her, confused. "I won't be able to write down your number. My cell phone was dead. I didn't have a charger with me. I never made it home. But if I survive, I'll be here. Come and talk to me. If I'm alive, maybe I can help you in any way I can. You know, help you with the dog, as usual. I mean, you saved my life last night. I owe you one. My name is Ciara." Andrew Ciara smiled. "Then I'll come by again. You're going to live. The doctors told me it's nothing serious." She lied. Andrew believed her, and he was relieved. An hour later, they drained the fluid from his lungs. He was lying in his room, coming off the anesthesia, when the thud of heels hitting tile in the hospital corridor. It was Ciara, who had heard that Andrew was in the hospital and was on her way to visit him. When she found out she was pregnant, the thoughts in her head changed. Who was that woman? And what did she want anyway? By chance, she met Nabu on the street. He said he missed her, that he'd chased away an ex who'd lied to him about the baby. "You wouldn't happen to have a picture of her, would you?" Ciara asked. A thought crept into her head. What if she was the one who came by? Nabu found her social media profile and turned the phone screen toward her. Ciara slid her eyes over the picture of the beautiful blonde and immediately realized everything. "Okay, I forgive you, be happy," she said and hugged him happily. And then she turned and ran. She started to call Andrew, but didn't get through. So she looked for him. She had to ask a friend in the authorities. When he called back, Ciara had a speech prepared. She wanted to apologize, make up and tell him that Andrew would soon become a father. "Andrew Kalugan is in the hospital. He has an operation. Can you write down the address?" said into the phone her acquaintance. Ciara felt sick. She was guilty. She didn't believe him. But how could she do that to him? And without her, he was sick. Ciara rushed to him so fast she almost had an accident. She kept telling herself everything would be all right. When she was allowed into the room, Andrew was just coming out of anesthesia. She pestered all the doctors, asking every little detail about his health. "He'll live." Calm down, the doctor on duty that day answered her. Now Ciara stood in the ward in a white coat, shoe covers and cap, and watched her favorite man open his eyes. "Are you here?" he asked. "Chiara who?" Chiara didn't understand. Andrew lifted himself up and wrinkled his nose in pain. There were IVs in his hands. His consciousness was hazy after the anesthesia, but he could clearly see who was in front of him. "Chiara, is that you?" "And Chiara?" "She was just walking by and called me an ambulance. I never cheated on you," he said. A hurt Chiara cried. "I know. I must have been going through some hormonal changes. I freaked out. I'm such an idiot. I did such a terrible thing to you. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be alive. I drove you away. Don't forgive me. Send me away. No, forgive me, please. I can't do this without you." Andrew smiled. "Come to me." Chiara lowered herself to him. "I've missed you so much. It was Nabu's ex. Decided I broke her happiness, apparently. I'm just dying of shame and guilt in front of you. How can I make it up to you?" "I've already forgiven you. Just try to learn to trust me," he said. "Okay, but in my defense, you got me pregnant. I'm terribly pregnant. I'm 100% pregnant. I'm nauseous, and I'm having mood swings." Andrew was surprised. "Pregnant? Really? You're allowed to be pregnant?" He was afraid for her. After all, she was just finishing up therapy. "It's okay. The doctors say everything's fine now. Pregnancy could even be good for your endocrine system and stabilize everything. Well, of course there are risks, but I'll be monitored by doctors all the time, more than other pregnant women." "That's so great," Andrew said. And it was pure truth. He was just happy. Andrew stayed in the same hospital for a few more days. Chiara was tired of it, so she invited her doctor to examine her lover and let him go home. The doctor told him to stay under observation for a few more days. What upset Chiara? But there was nowhere to go. Nevertheless, Andrew was on the mend, even though he had suffered from severe pneumonia. He was still being pumped for fluids. I had to be on the safe side. One day in the hospital corridor, Chiara did run into Chiara. After recognizing who she was, Chiara began to thank her. Chiara looked at her strangely the whole time. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Chiara asked. "I think I know who you are," Chiara replied. Chiara frowned. Many in the town knew her family. "You're my sister," Chiara said. Chiara's eyebrows crept upward. All her life, her father had been trying to find his first child. His wife, Chiara's mom, had given birth early, very early. They'd left the little girl in an orphanage. And when they tried to find her, it was too late. The trail went cold, everything got mixed up. Chiara ended up growing up in a foster home, but when she was 15, they died. Chiara ended up back in the orphanage. While her foster parents were still alive, they helped her find her birth family. Chiara was in shock at the time. She expected them to be alcoholics or worse. And they were the most powerful family in town. She wanted to go and visit them and say, "Here I am," but resentment overcame the urge to hug her father and mother. They'd given up on her. They didn't want her. She didn't know that they were looking for a daughter, that they regretted leaving her at the orphanage. In the end, she just watched their lives from the sidelines. She knew about Chiara too, but she didn't seek out a meeting. Chiara was also aware that she had a sister somewhere, but even with her father's connections, they couldn't find her. The records were a terrible mess. The information was not yet entered into the computer, and the fire destroyed many important records. "It's you." Kira looked at Kiara with curiosity. I'm not imposing. I didn't think we'd run into you like this." "Oh my God, we've been looking for you. Your parents really wanted to find you." "Looking for me?" Kiara and Ciara sat on a couch in the hospital hallway and talked for hours until they were interrupted by Andrew, who came out of the room. When he appeared, Kira and Ciara began to tell him that they were sisters. "It doesn't work like that," Andrew said when he was discharged. Kira and Ciara got together. Ciara had grown very attached to her sister, asking her how her pregnancy was going. How was she feeling? They were trying to catch up on all the years they hadn't known each other. And besides, Kira just adored Peter, her nephew, and spoiled him as much as she could. It was only when the positive outcome of her and Kiara's kinship came that she accepted her sister's help. With a rich, Kiara realized her dream, opened a private school on remote education, and began to work with children remotely. After all, alternative education was gaining momentum. A law came out that made going to school in person optional. Ciara taught kids who wanted to be educated at home. Her business was booming. Profits were good. "Do you have your father's genes?" Ciara said. "He was a businessman by God. You did it right the first time. Good girl, I'm proud of you." Ciara often remembered how she had called an ambulance to a stranger and how that act had changed her life. They were friends with Andrew, and as promised, he helped her around the house. Just not with the cleaning, but with the moving. Ciara began to rent her small apartment, which she had received from the state as an orphan. She bought a newer and bigger place for herself. Andrew and Kiara continued to work together side by side. Kira long blamed herself for that act and was afraid of losing him. And Andrew forgave her instantly, because he loved her so much and understood that if you get burned on milk, you blow on water. Their company prospered. Nabo disappeared from Kira's life forever. He moved abroad to his relatives and started his life all over again. After Kira had forgiven him, it was as if it was easier for him to do so. Stella, on the other hand, she heard that her lies had worked. Kira and Andrew broke up. Then she was very happy about her victory. She decided she had to find a new simpleton and spin him at the club. One day she met a handsome, athletic man. She didn't know what kind of man he was, and soon Stella realized that she was actually pregnant. Her boyfriend did not want a child and was not going to get married. He was from a criminal family and threatened to kill her if she demanded anything from him. She didn't know there were such violent people. She got scared and went in for an abortion. But they told her that the term was too long and there were contraindications. She had to give birth. Stella agreed that she would give the baby to a childless couple, but after giving birth, she realized that she could not. She was left alone with a baby in her arms. She became very healthy, eating sweets to nourish her loneliness and longing. Her parents helped her. Soon she had to get a job as a saleswoman in a local store. No more decent men looked at her, but she was happy in her own way. She had a son she loved. Andrew and Kira also had a long-awaited daughter. They named her Alina, and while Kira was on maternity leave, all the work fell on Andrew's shoulders. He forgot that once worked for Ignatius. Therefore, meeting him in his office was extremely surprised. But Ignatius was even more surprised. He had come to the local businessman to agree to cooperate. Ignatius' business was hanging by a thread. and only cooperation with a company like Andrew and Kira's could stabilize his business. I take it you can't help me. But you can't mix business and personal. You're a professional, Andrew. Besides, I've helped you out plenty of times. Remember, we've had our moments. Let's put the past behind us, and you just listen to what I have to say. And make your decision like a professional, not a marketer. Andrew realized that Ignatius was trying to butter him up. He rubbed the finger that had once been broken at the suggestion of his comrade. How am I supposed to do business with a man who hired big-amassed men to beat me up? I don't want to do business with you. Go away and stay out of my sight. Well, when you go broke again, don't ask me for a job, Ignatius said. Leaving, I will not come. Now the territory of the market will belong to me. Ignatius realized that it was Andrew who had bought the territory, and he had in fact come to the one who had ruined his modest business. Andrew had no intention of doing this intentionally. The deal had been handled by Kira even before her maternity leave. Ignatius was only a tenant and the firm was expanding. The plan was to buy a plot of land for trading and renting out, and the market area was just right. Ignatius left and Andrew never saw him again. He and Kira expanded the business and now dreamed of a son, so that little Elena was not bored. And besides, Andrew had always dreamed of a large family.
"Please," cried the girl. She didn't have enough strength to drag this woman into the entrance, but no one could help. The streets were deserted. Selena didn't understand why she was doing this. It was just the first thing that came to mind she put into action. She made one last push, and already the woman was outside the threshold of the entrance. You stink." The girl plucked her nose and wrinkled her nose. She got up and went home. "How long am I going to wait for you?" Jack shouted to his buddies. "Where are you always in a hurry?" The guys were just putting on their leather jackets and blazers. "I don't like to be late." He stood by the car and stared at the wheels. "Nobody's late for anything." Billy came out to him. "They had a jammed arrow today. They needed to keep their faces on the ground." "How many?" asked Jack about the number of people his friends had pulled up. 40 men, one of them shouted. "That's enough." He spat and got into the car. It wasn't the first time they'd been together, so they knew what was going to happen. They drove up to a large warehouse. No one was there yet. They started to look around. Not a couple minutes later, cars came from both sides, shooting. Jack fell to the ground. He grabbed his shoulder. He just couldn't feel it. "How?" Hey, fell down next to him to take cover behind a car, buddy. "I'll live." He pulled a gun from behind his belt. The fight was not for life. Many of them just did not come out of it alive. "Get to the cars," the man in charge shouted. But Sam looked in the direction of the enemy. "I said to the cars, then we'll deal with these creeps." He turned and looked at the asphalt, where several lifeless bodies lay. Everyone in the car was silent. No one wanted to talk about what had happened. One thing was clear: there was no need to ever rush into anything. Those guys were saved by the effect of surprise. They saw where and how Jack's men were standing. "To the restaurant," the young man said sharply to the driver. They turned, stopped in front of a beautiful building. Jack got out of the car. His cronies followed him. Quiet music was playing in the room. No one was there. "Waiter," Jack called irritably, because there was no one in the room at all. Now, a woman's voice was heard. And now she came out from around the corner. The young man fixed his eyes on her. A tall girl with a chiseled figure. Short black hair, snow-white skin, red lips, and a short skirt made her irresistible. "Mine." Jack turned to his companions. "What do you want?" The girl approached and began to smile. "You." The young man grabbed her by the waist and pulled her closer to him. "What are you doing?" "I'll call the guards." She was afraid. "Don't worry, I won't hurt you." He sat her down next to him. "I can't sit here," she looked back. "With me everything is allowed." He looked at her and admired her. They ordered. When everything was on the table, Jack poured in shots to memorialize those who didn't come back with them tonight. "Beauty, do you have a name?" The waitress sat with them as they did so. "Inga," she said, looked at him and smiled. "What a beautiful name, and I'm Jack. I feel like you and I were made for each other." He nuzzled his nose into her neck. "I think you'd have to know a person a little bit to say that," she coquetted. "I don't need anything. I can see everything." He pressed himself against her again. Inge liked that kind of treatment. She had wanted someone to like her for a long time. Today was her first shift at the restaurant, and such luck. They sat at the table until the evening, and then Jack stood up and held out his hand to Inge. "Are you with me?" he asked. If he says that, he's not asking about tonight. He's asking about forever, whispered someone behind Inge. Yes, she gave him her hand and got up from her seat. He nodded his head. That meant no one was getting in the car with him. The two of them went there alone. The girl looked out the window. They drove past various stores and other storefronts. It seemed to her that this man would do anything for her. She would be happy in this life. Jack was generous. He spared nothing for his girl, buying clothes, flowers, gold, anything she wanted. Inga didn't know what he did, but it didn't matter to her. She simply idolized her young man. "Does it hurt?" She approached him when he entered the apartment. "Go away," he could have snapped at her, but Inga didn't notice it. Let it pass her ears. "Jack, let me blow on it," she said at him affectionately. "Inga, there's nothing there." He wrinkled his nose as he moved his hand. "Why are you doing all this? What if they kill you?" That was what the girl feared more than anything. Spit, he glared at her until she did. "I'll go." She went to the kitchen. "Bring something to drink," he asked in a loud voice. Right now, Inga was happy to do anything for him. "And let's get married." He took her in his arms. They had been together for almost 6 months. Sure, she kissed him on the nose. "Then I'm telling the guys to make sure it's all good." He set her on the floor, slapped his palm on her butt, and stared after her. "What are you doing?" She turned around and made big eyes. To buy a wedding dress back then, you had to have quite a few connections or try really hard, but Jack had both. He made a couple of calls, and the next day Inga was trying on a white dress. "So it's big for you," sat next to her friend Oksana. She thought it would be just "Are you stupid? It can be sewn, but no one else has it. Only me," she shouted at her friend. "And don't yell at me." The girl got up, came to Inga, and started to pull the fabric. "Yes, this will be just right." They looked in the mirror. Jack was getting ready too. He bought a suit. He really didn't want to wear a tie. "I feel like I'm going to put all this on, and then you'll put me in a coffin," he said. "What are you talking about?" said his witness and best friend, Billy. "All right, help me." The groom stood in front of him to tie his tie. "What's there to do?" The guy was twirling 2 ribbons in his hands. "Oh, all right." Jack pulled it all off. "Who made up that I have to wear a tie?" "That's right," supported his friend. They were ready. The cars were decorated too. Now all that was left was to pick up the bride and drive to the registry office. The groom could not embarrass himself in front of his friends and the rest of the gang, so the best restaurant in town was ordered. The wedding party sang and sang until the morning, and the next day the guests who urgently wanted okroshka and brine. "Well, wife, now I need an hair," kissed her in the evening young man. "There will be for you an hair and heiress." Inga laughed rinningly. "Well, I'm on business." He went out and slammed the door. Not even 3 months later, as the girl realized that she was expecting a child, and she informed her husband about it. "See, you can have it any time you want." He was drunk. "Were you with the girls?" She pulled a hair off his jacket. "Look, don't start, huh?" He turned to her. "What do you mean, no start?" She moved closer to him. "If you want to have everything, and you were nothing for it, do not start," advised the husband to his wife. It was the first time Inga had seen him like this. She backed away, thinking it was better for her to stay away. "You my wife, I will always come back here. And women are women." He went to his room. Such a turn, Inga did not consider such a turn in her fate. She didn't know what her husband was doing, but she knew that he had a lot of money, an apartment, and more than several cars. "How are you?" Jack asked her at breakfast. It could have been better. She didn't look up at him. "Oh, are we offended?" He pulled his chair closer to her. "Don't be." She took his hand off her knee. Okay, he stood up and walked away again. The girl looked out the window at him walking to his car. The pregnancy and delivery had been easy. Jack, as always, had put his wife in the best hospital there was at the time. Well, hello, son. Jack greeted his wife and child from the maternity hospital. Inga saw that a lot of people had arrived. They were all family friends. Thank you, she kissed her spouse as he handed her a bouquet of flowers. They arrived home, where in one of the rooms stood an assembled crib, a table, and a small dresser. The mother immediately put the baby down and began to make everything to make them comfortable here. What are you doing? Jack entered the room. Like a place for me and my son. She stopped and looked at him. There is no me and my son. There is us and my son. This is his room and he will be here alone. The man put the point. Inga was upset about this, but she realized that it was better not to argue with her husband. She spent her days in her son's room, and at night she went to her husband's room. Jack, I think I'm expecting a baby again, she whispered to him one evening. Arnold wasn't even 2 years old at the time. I'm just glad of that. He kissed her neck. Times had come to a point where it was very hard for ordinary people to live, and the Brawls got kind of pissed off. They started opening different firms, buying up everything, and the guns got tougher. Don't leave the house today, Jack warned his wife. Where are you going? She grabbed his arm. And I have to. He opened the door and left. Inga was very worried about her spouse. Over the past 2 months, they had already buried 4 friends. It was time to give birth. It was not scary, but exciting. Everything went exactly the same as the first time. Now the couple had a daughter, Julia. Billy came to meet Inga from the hospital. Why not Jack? The girl's eyes were very big. She was afraid to hear the worst thing in her life. Because he's being shepherded, looked Billy in the rearview mirror. I see. Inga leaned back in her seat and exhaled. They arrived home. Her husband was there. He greeted his wife and daughter, kissed her, and gave her flowers. I need you. Jack approached Inga a couple months after Julia showed up. Yes, she was always ready. Let's go. I asked a woman. She'll watch the kids. He pulled her. Where to? The woman didn't understand. Soon you'll understand everything. They left the apartment, went downstairs, got into the car. We are now going to go sign the documents. Do not ask unnecessary questions, he warned her. I understand. She never asked anything unnecessary. When all matters were settled, Jack locked himself in his office and did not come out for a long time. Inga went to the phone, made sure no one was listening, and dialed Billy's number. Hello, she whispered. What? Does Jack know you're calling? He immediately asked a question. No, tell him what's coming up. She realized long ago. Tomorrow there will be a big shoot. Probably no one will come back. After these words, he immediately hung up. Inga cried, how she was alone with 2 small children in such a cruel world. It was unbearable to sit and just watch your husband prepare to die. Talk to me, she asked him. Not now. He turned away to avoid looking her in the eye. When tomorrow, she stared at him. What do you know? He guessed. Practically nothing. It's very serious, she sniffed. That's all. You don't need to know more. He still didn't turn to her. And he left. No kiss, no hug. Inge was offended. At home, the man did not return. The wife did not know what to do. She did not sleep, went from room to room. In the morning, when she lay down for a while, the doorbell rang. Inga jumped out of her seat like a stunned person and ran to open the door. A stranger stood outside the door. Inga, he looked at her. Yes, and who are you? Her legs became cotton. She realized that she was about to faint. Alexander, he made a gesture to show that he wanted to enter the apartment. Yes, of course, she let him pass her by. Yesterday, you probably know, there was a massacre at the abandoned factory. Only he and Billy survived from Jack's crew. But Sirioga's injuries are very serious. He's in the hospital, and Jack was taken. The young man lowered his head. How taken? Inga shrieked and started to get nervous. I don't know the details. I was only told to tell you about it. He left the apartment, went down the stairs and left, and the woman remained standing in the hallway. She went into the room to the children. Arnold was 6 and Julia was 3. She sat down on the couch that stood there, tears streaming from her eyes. Why hadn't he bothered to protect herself? Why had he let this happen? "Mommy, what's wrong?" Her daughter sat up next to her. "Everything is fine, sleep." She looked at Arnold. He frowned and did not want to talk to anyone about anything. Inga waited for the trial and what would be assigned to her husband. The sentence was cruel, but the lawyers tried. They managed to reduce the sentence by 6 years. Jack had only 9 years left to serve. "Don't cry." One of the wives of those who died pressed Inga to her breast. 9 years, she told herself. "Inga, pull yourself together." The woman slapped her. "What?" She grabbed her face. "Nothing. My husband died. I have children at home and everything else, and you are killing yourself," she shouted at the whole corridor. "I'm sorry." She didn't know what else to say. She returned home. Nothing was interesting. The children came. She fed them, did laundry, cleaned up, did everything else. She was in no mood. "Hello." She came to the phone in the evening. It had been 3 years since Jack had had his trial. "You didn't wake her up?" Billy called her. "No, just put the kids to bed." She lied. Of course, she'd been asleep for a while. "Can I come over to your place?" "Why are you avoiding it?" asked the guy. "Okay." The girl finally gave in. To be honest, she liked this guy since the first time they met, but she'd never told anyone about it. If Jack chose her, she'd stay with him. She'd never been alone with Billy because she was afraid of herself. But now, he'd asked to come over. "Hi." He stood on the doorstep with flowers. "Why?" She looked at the bouquet. "Why, you're a woman, and you like flowers." He was talking nonsense. "Come in." She took the bouquet and put it in a vase. "How are you here?" The young man came into the room. As you can see, she waved her hands. Until now, Inga had saved on everything, lived on the money that was still from Jack, and his friends helped whoever they could. Yes, not much. He listened to Inga's story. "What did you want?" She wanted him to leave. "Just to meet, to talk, to see you." He came closer to her. "Billy, you're his best friend." She looked into his eyes. "And what should best friends do?" "The right thing to do, the right thing to support at any moment." He finished and pressed his lips to hers. The woman's body so missed the man's caresses, she sagged toward him. Billy picked her up in his arms and carried her to the couch. "Don't," she whispered, but she couldn't tear herself away from his lips. "You're so beautiful." He undid the buttons of her blouse. They kissed. Billy was so tender, and at some point Inga felt someone watching them. She turned her head toward the door. Arnold was standing there. "I hate you," he said, grabbed something off the table and threw it at the couple. "Son." She jumped up, but he'd already gone to his room. "Don't mind him. He's just a kid. He'll forget." Billy pulled her back. "What?" "Practically 10 years old, little, you name it." She didn't know what to do now. "Okay, if you want, I can say your daddy went and left your mommy and I'll help you with everything." He put on his jeans. "When is Jack coming out?" She stared unblinking at the man. "When it does, everyone will have forgotten everything by now," laughed Billy. Since he offered, Inga didn't refuse. The children and she would be provided for again. And she liked Billy. A week later, they moved in with Billy. "Where are you going?" the man asked her as she gathered in the hallway. "To Jack's." She looked puzzled. "To Jack's? Forget that name. You're my woman now," he said simply. Then he would realize everything at once. Inga was afraid. "Calm down. Everything will be all right. I'm near." He came to her and helped her take off her coat. Of course, Billy was very self-confident. Arnold grew up a mean boy. He hated his mother because she betrayed his father, and he felt even more anger toward her new suitor. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Billy asked him when they were all sitting at the table together. "Traitor, how could you? He trusted you with everything. You were his best friend," the boy said through gritted teeth. "You're too young to talk about such things." The man smiled back. "I'll grow up and kill you," the boy promised him. "All right," agreed Billy. And so they lived. Julia was a quiet girl. She never fully understood why her brother hated these people. She loved her mother, and she was neutral toward Billy. But their quiet life ended when Jack came back. He was no longer the kind uncle who loved his wife and children. His son had written to him long ago to tell him what had become of his wife. All these years he dreamed of looking his friend and his wife in the eye. "Well, weren't you waiting?" He was standing in the doorway when Billy opened it. "Jack, hi." He reached out his hands to him, but was immediately punched in the face. "What are you doing?" "I meant well." His friend looked at him. Yeah, you did. He nodded and went inside the apartment. Inga was sitting in the room talking to her daughter. She saw Julia's eyes get big, turned around, flinched. Jack, what are you doing here? She knew this was going to be bad. It's you, what are you doing here? Pack up quickly and let's go home, he yelled. Where's Billy? She was shaking. Ha, show you him? The man returned to the corridor. He took his former friend by the scruff of the neck and threw him into the room. Inga saw that between his legs were all bloody. What have you done? She was so frightened that she didn't even think about the children seeing all this. The sooner you pull yourself together, the sooner I'll call an ambulance, he smirked. That's it, we're ready. Call it in, she thought. She could come back for her things next time. Whatever you say, darling. He went to the phone and dialed the right number. After that, together with the whole family, they went to the place where they used to live. And how could you think of such a thing? To leave me, ha? And to whom? To Seryoga? He could not calm down. Jack, I'm sorry. I thought it would be better for the kids. She lowered her head. Trust me, no one will be better off now. He laughed again. They arrived. They got out of the car. Inga could see people walking by. She wanted to shout for them to stop and help her, but there was no way to do it. Daddy, how glad I am that you came. Arnold did not leave him. Yes, son, but I'm not very glad. He turned his head toward his wife. She was standing by the mirror. What are you looking at? He shouted sharply. What are you doing? She turned around and didn't understand. He hit her on the back of the head with force. She banged her face against the mirror, shattering it. Those were her first scars. Arnold, call an ambulance, she begged her son. You call it. He stood watching his mother bleed to death. Why are you so angry? She was crying. She was hurt and offended by everything that was happening. Inga saw that her daughter was dialing a number. A few minutes later, their doorbell rang. The doctors were horrified at what had become of the woman's face, but she didn't say who had done it. Slipped on the floor and fell, she told the medic. Yes, she nodded. How bad? She looked up at the medic. Badly, he nodded. Scars. Tears came to her eyes again. There will be. The medic didn't hide it. She returned home with a bandaged face. Julia came to her. She sat next to her mom and stroked her arm. What, Mommy, are you paying for your mistakes? Arnold stood in the doorway. What did I ever do to you? She didn't understand. It hurt to speak, so she turned away and didn't want to say or hear anything else. Jack was busy again with some business. His capital had already increased during the time he had been in the out-of-the-way places, and now they were increasing. He was buying apartments, renting them out, cars, reselling them, whatever he could get his hands on. Why do you put up with all this? Get away from him, Julia said, when the years of school were coming to an end. Do you think he'd let me do that? The woman's body was a wreck. Her husband did nothing but beat her, beating her, tearing her skin, putting out cigarette butts on her legs, back, and neck. Inga cried, but it didn't help. She endured. Julia felt sorry for her mom, but there was nothing she could do either. The girl wanted so much to get out of this house quickly, not to see all these faces surrounding her again, except her mom, of course. I wish you, daughter, never to experience such a thing. Her mother kissed Julia. Don't come home unnecessarily. Julia hugged her mother. She didn't need anything from her father or anyone else. She had finished school. Now she was about to enroll. She wasn't going home. Arnold never left his father's side for a minute. When he felt his shoulder next to him, he was so arrogant and cocky. When the man wasn't around, he was silent all the time. We should change the car. He hinted to his father that he needed a new car. I'll take care of it myself. The man stopped him. In the evening, when the table was set, the two of them sat at it. Inga did not come out. Why do you put up with her? Arnold asked Jack. Don't you know? The man was very surprised, for he knew that his son stuck his nose in everywhere he could. Believe me, no, thought he. So for love, bit off a piece of meat the young man. You saw her, what love, and what a beauty she was. The man savored these words. So why? The boy kept up. Then, when the hunt for me began, I signed everything over to your mother so that I had nothing to take from me. It's a good thing she didn't know what she was signing to, or they'd have ripped me off with Billy, he said, his jowls moving. I can see why you're so fond of her. Arnold got up from the table. He'd been out a lot lately, traveling to different parties. He didn't arrive alone this morning. Dad, meet Diana. He introduced the girl. For an hour or all day? Mickey asked. You what? This is my girlfriend, said the son, offended. Ah, well, if it's a girl, then come in. He pointed to the sofa, which stood in the living room. Diana got acquainted with the mother of her young man. Oh, she came out of the bathroom when Inga was walking down the hall. Don't be afraid, said the woman in a hoarse voice. What's wrong with you? Diana looked at her. Husband and son tried, she said openly. God, the girl even lost the power of speech. Think many times before becoming his wife, Inga warned her. Excuse me, she went to her room. Slava liked that he now had a girlfriend. He spent a lot of time with her, wanted her to be his wife, but also that it was very early to propose to her. Arnold, why don't we go for a walk today? Diana chirped cheerfully. Okay, we'll go for a walk, just a little later. He didn't want to go anywhere, just to lie on the bed with her. All right, suit yourself, then I'll go. She already wanted to leave the room, but Arnold didn't let her. He threw a slipper and the doors closed. You're not going anywhere, I told you later. He looked at her and got angry. Slavachka, what are you doing? Diana was scared. Nothing, Diana, he mocked her. She walked over and sat down on the bed next to the guy. He grabbed her arm and pulled her to him with a sharp pull. It hurts, she wrinkled her nose. Me too, he started kissing her. Diana did not push him away, on the contrary. She began to reciprocate. The girl realized that one wrong action and he would just throw her to the trash. Hello, can I sit here? The girl came to Inga's room. Did you hit her? She guessed. No, just a fight. The girl averted her eyes. Yes, I know how he quarrels, sighed the woman. They sat in the room for a few minutes in silence. What am I to do? Asked Diana at last. Nothing, run or endure for the rest of your life. She pointed with her hand to her face. After that, the woman and Inga began to communicate well. Arnold proposed to me, she showed me the ring. You'd be a fool to marry him, the mother said quite seriously. But I love your son, she said confusedly. Yes, I thought I did too. Inga smiled a little. Will you help me prepare for the gala? She hoped for the woman's support. Of course, the woman never refused anyone. But the next day Arnold announced that there would be no celebration. They would just get married and sit here as a family. Would we invite Inga? The bride was sure of it. Of course not. The son wrinkled his nose. Good. Again the girl swallowed everything. On the weekend, they went to the registry office. If Diana wore a beautiful dress and arranged her own hair, Arnold was in stretchy sweatpants and a t-shirt. Could you dress normally? She didn't understand. And so it will do. You love me not for money and not for clothes, he winked at her. What a fool you are. Why are you like your father? Your mother has suffered so much and you are there. Diana got angry. They signed. They were now husband and wife. They came home, as Arnold wanted. There was a huge table in the hall, bursting with hors d'oeuvres. Only Jack was there to greet them. Well, hello, children. He hugged the two at once. Let's eat already, sat down at the table the groom. And I have a present for you. The father left the room. He came back with a box, handed it to his son. It was the keys to a new car. Thank you, Dad. I've wanted it for so long. The young man rejoiced at the gift like a child. Diana looked at the two relatives and waited for something to be given to her. But it turned out that there were no more presents. It was a shame. In the evening, she went to Inga's room and took some cake to treat her. Thank you, my daughter. But in the morning, you'll realize what kind of husband you've chosen for yourself, the woman said. No, we'll be fine, the girl assured her. Yes, the woman stood and nodded. She knew her son better than anyone and what he was capable of. I can't even imagine that your own son could do this to you, Diana told the woman. Believe me, he may not have done much physically, but mentally he was killing me to the point where I just wanted to lie down and do nothing else. Inga turned away to the window. Perhaps she could cry now, if there were still tears left. As Diana said goodbye to her, she left the room. The girl had no idea that all the things she had said today were to be experienced by her. Where have you been? She entered the room and heard the voice of her drunken husband. Arnold, what are you doing? She came up to him like a pussycat. What? That's what he hit her in the face. She flew right back to the door. The girl was lying there, looking at the young man with frightened eyes. What do you think you're doing? She started to get up, but he wouldn't let her. You went to see her, didn't you? Do you want to become like her? Only I turn away, immediately to my friend you will go away. Stood over her and spoke haughtily. What friend? You don't even have any friends. Diana didn't understand anything. No friends. Again she received a blow in the side. Soon will appear. Do not worry. And now go, wash up, and go to bed. I'm tired. Diana stood under the hot shower. Tears flowed down her cheeks. She didn't know what to do now. Inga was right when she said he was like that. Why did she take this step? Why did she marry him? Why did she pretend to some riches? And life, what about it? She couldn't stay in that shower forever. She had to get out at some point anyway. And Diana was out of there. Arnold was already asleep on the bed. She breathed a sigh of relief and lay down next to him. In the morning, he got up as if nothing had happened, kissed his wife, and told her that they were going down for breakfast together now. She couldn't bear to look at him. Right after breakfast, she went to her mother-in-law's house again. Oh, did my predictions come true? She looked at the girl's lip. Yes, you were right. He was drunk last night, and everything happened as you said. Diana is ashamed to admit it. Inga came up to her, pressed her against her, stroked her head. At that moment, the door opened. On the threshold stood the son. What are you? What are you teaching her here? Shouted at his mother Arnold. It's time for you to calm down. I'm not teaching anyone anything, and I myself did nothing wrong. I only wanted you and Julia to be happy, she told him in a calm voice. He grabbed her by the hair and pushed her. Her mother fell down. She didn't want to get up because she knew that this blow would be followed by another one. Arnold grabbed his wife's hand and they left that room. Inga got up. She didn't know what to do, so she went to her husband's office. Jack, can I come in? She asked at the door. What do you want? He looked at her sideways. I want to talk to you. She sat down in the chair across from him. Talk. No one's stopping you, he told her in a rough voice. Why do you keep me here? Let me go. You are doing well. Why do you need me here in this house? The woman did not understand. Why, and you still don't understand why I keep you here? And he told her all about the documents and the money. I'll rewrite it all back, she said. No, darling, I don't want to lose everything I've worked so hard for, he laughed in her face. Am I to suffer with you for the rest of my life? So I will do it all before, without your help. She abruptly turned around and went to the exit. Come on, you'll only make our lives easier, her husband said to her. She ran down the steps and cried. She would never wish such a fate as hers on anyone. In her room, she opened the closet, took out a sash, tied it to the radiator. And the worst part was that she didn't have the fortitude to do it to herself. She sat down helplessly by that radiator and cried in her voice. In the evening, when father and son were conferring in his study, Diana came to her again. Why did you come here again? Didn't you get enough of it last time? I'm quiet. They are in a meeting in the office. She pressed her finger to her lips. At that moment, the girl's eyes slid to the floor. She saw the belt. Go. Her mother-in-law pushed her towards the door. You what? She stared at Inga. Nothing. Didn't have the guts, the woman admitted. Diana walked out of her room, eyes widened. She imagined what could happen now. Would she have to suffer the same way for the rest of her life? The girl cried for the first time in this house just for fun, out of thought. She went out into the garden, where it was very beautiful. Arnold joined her a few minutes later. Where are you going? He asked casually. Nowhere, I just decided to walk here. She looked at the green bushes. If you go anywhere without my knowledge, you'll be fine, he said knowingly. Arnold, I don't want to be your wife anymore. She looked at him pleadingly. Why not? You've been pleasing me, all to get me to propose. And now what's happened? He made a perplexed face. Let me go, please. She put her hands together. As soon as I get bored of you, you'll go straight to all four sides. He turned around and went into the house. Fool, Diana said to herself and followed her husband. After that, further married life consisted of one thing. He came home. Diane slept with him. She was no good for anything else, according to Arnold. When there was no one else in the house, He and Inga would gather in the kitchen. They might even drink wine and gossip. But that was very rare. Usually both of them were in their rooms. Julia was by this time well into her studies. She knew that she could only rely on herself, so she had to get a profession. "Did you get in?" asked her friend, whom they had met on the train on their way here. "I don't know." Julia stood with her back to the board where the results were hanging. "Girlfriend, I congratulate you, and I got in just to another college. It's across the street." She pointed her finger at the building. At this point, Julia was finally able to tune in and turned around. She had indeed gotten in. "Shall we celebrate?" Nika pressed her. "Okay, just not tonight. I have a headache," she complained. "Well, how boring you are," took offense girlfriend. "Tomorrow or at the weekend we'll go somewhere," Julia said. "Aren't you going home?" Nika asked. "No, I don't want to talk to my parents," the girl confessed. "I see, but I'm going. So it's not fate." They laughed together. Julia did not want to shirk her studies. She chose the profession herself. She entered it herself, and now she wanted to finish it herself. But sometimes fate gives surprises you don't expect. They had a celebration at the college, dedication to students. It was fun, a concert, and afterwards, a disco. Julia had so much fun that she forgot about the time. When she looked at her watch, it was past 11. She ran to the dorm. No, the stern janitor mothballed her from the window. "Well, please," the girl begged her. "I won't let her in." The woman stepped away from the window and walked away. Julia looked around. It was dark and cold outside. She didn't know where to go. She wandered to the nearest 5-story building, at least in the entryway to keep warm. There she sat down on the steps and dozed off. "Who are you?" A guy came up. "Nobody," the girl snapped at him. "Well, nobody. What are you doing here?" He sat down next to her. You could hear that he smelled of alcohol. "Leave me alone. They didn't let me into the dorm, so I'm sitting here." She didn't want to talk. "Let's go." He took her hand. "Where to?" She didn't want to go, so she started to pull away. "Don't be afraid, silly." He looked at her and smiled. Julia followed him. She wasn't. At least she'll be warm. "Here, I live alone. You can stay here." He led her into his apartment. "Thank you," she said quietly. The guy went to the kitchen, put the kettle on, went out into the corridor and watched her take off her shoes and jacket. "Let's go. I'll make tea," he called her. They walked through, sat down at the table. The young man made tea, put it in front of Julia. "Carlo," he sat down opposite. "Julia." She took a small sip of tea and burned herself. "So here's to introductions." He raised his cup. "Aha." She sat back and looked into hers. Carlo bedded the girl on the couch. She didn't want to sleep, a little afraid. But as soon as her head touched the pillow, she just passed out. "Wake up, sleepyhead. You'll sleep through everything." The guy woke her up in the morning. "Yes." Julia jumped up. "Where is she? What's wrong with her?" "I had a lot of questions in my head." "Don't worry, you haven't been drinking," he laughed. "I have to go to school." She started packing the things she had taken off yesterday before going to bed. "Will you meet me today?" he asked as he walked her to the door. "I don't know." She looked up at him. At that moment, something clicked inside. Why hadn't she noticed yesterday that he was so handsome? "Well, I know where you live. I'll come get you." He opened the door for her. Julia came out. From that moment, the girl couldn't help thinking about Alexei. She waited for him, but he did not come. The next day, she also waited for him, but again, he was not there. "What's going on with you?" Sarah, her roommate, asked her. "I think I'm in love." She didn't want to tell anyone how she felt. "With whom?" She was surprised because Dashka was either at school or in the dormitory all day long. "Remember when I didn't sleep at home?" the neighbor looked. "Yes," she nodded. "So Julia told me everything." "You have to be so naive. It's good. At least nothing happened in the apartment." Shook her head neighbor. "You don't understand anything." The girl was offended. "Okay, but you understand a lot." She turned her back to the wall. A month passed and Carlo never showed up. Even though the houses were next to each other, Julia never saw him. "There came to you," went up to their room on duty. "Who?" surprised the girl. She knew that a friend from a neighboring college could come, but she said she would be busy. "Some guy," the girl smiled. Julia's heart beat faster in her chest. She put on her slippers and went out. "Hi." Carlo was standing there. flowers in his hands. "Hello," she walked up to him, looking around to make sure no one saw anything. It seemed to her that everyone knew that she had been waiting for him for so long, and he had come only now. "Why are you so pensive?" he asked her. "No, I'm fine." Julia smelled the flowers. "Will you come with me for a walk?" he asked her. "I don't know," she shrugged. "Come on, I'll tell you where I've been." He pulled her by the arm, just like that time in the entryway. "Okay, I need to change." She took her hand out of his and ran upstairs. "What, you're here?" the roommate asked. "And I'll ask you to be jealous in silence." Julia laughed and left the room. They walked through the streets of the city. Carlo chattered incessantly. "I'm sorry I didn't come. I was sent on a business trip, so I was there all this time." He turned to her, and now he was walking ahead of her. "Why are you telling me this?" "I don't care." She made an indifferent look. "Thought you were waiting." The guy saddened. "Come on." "Waited a couple days." She told him the secret. "Well, I'm here, and now I'm not going anywhere." Carlo was so happy, talking all the time, laughing. "Okay." They had been outside for hours. The girl was freezing. "Shall we go to my place?" he asked her as they walked towards the dorm. "Let's not tonight." She didn't want to rush things. "Okay, whatever you say." He led her to the door, and then the young people stood opposite each other for a long time. Julia was thinking, even waiting for him to kiss her, and Carlo was in thought. He certainly wanted that kiss, but he was afraid to scare her off. They just said goodbye. The heart in the girl's chest was pounding, even pounding. She thought everyone could hear it. She had finally and irrevocably fallen in love with him. Now Carlo came for her every evening. They either went for a walk or went to his place. "Why don't you want to move? It's better in an apartment than in a dormitory." Every time he asked. "You know, I'm used to it." She was telling the truth. "Okay, I'll wait." He was stubborn. "So wait," she said, like a queen. But after New Year's Eve, the girl agreed and they started living together. "How happy I am, you can't even imagine." The guy woke up every morning. "Enough for me to talk about it. I'm happy too." She told him and kissed him after that. With her parents, Julia never communicated. She didn't think she needed to. She felt sorry for her mom. She thought she was going to get on her feet and take her in. "Why are you so sad?" Carlo had seen her like that a lot. "No, you just thought she was looking away so he wouldn't see her tears." "Well, that's your business. I won't interfere." After saying that, he climbed out from under the blanket and went to the kitchen. Julia looked at her lover and could not understand how such a chance meeting could bring her to such a wonderful man. "You don't know anything about him," her friend told her. "So what?" "I can see the man," Julia countered. "Okay, that's your business." The girl dismissed her. From that moment on, Julia stopped talking to everyone from her past circle. She gave all of herself to Carlo. "Why don't you ever talk about your parents?" Carlo asked her once. "I don't want to. I'm not doing well there." She didn't want to deceive him. "Okay, I'm not bothering you." He kissed her. One day, Julia went to the store. On the way, she met a classmate. They walked together, talking about something on the way. Carlo came home at that moment, knew where his girlfriend went out to meet her and saw this picture. "Who was that?" he asked her at home. "An acquaintance we studied together." She was sorting out bags. And why she did not pay attention to this situation, Julia still does not know. In the summer, after the first course, the young man proposed to his beloved. She, of course, agreed. "What kind of wedding do you want?" he asked her a week after the proposal. "None," she laughed. "What do you mean? You're turning me down." You could see the guy was angry. "I just don't want it." She was honest with him. "Oh, you scared him," he exhaled. They filed the application. Julia was very worried that she couldn't tell her mom about it, but she thought she would definitely visit her sometime. After the marriage, the young people didn't go anywhere. They just went on with their lives. "We're so boring," Julia said to Carlo. "What do you miss?" he asked. "I don't know." She sat on the couch and shrugged. "If you want, you can go out," he suggested. Well, she was going to ask him about it, but she didn't have the guts. The girls had been asking her to go out for a long time, and this weekend she promised them she would. That day she came home from school and started to get dressed up. "In this skirt you will not go anywhere," stood in the doorway of the room husband. "Why?" The girl didn't understand. It wasn't short. "Because I said so." He was insistent. "Okay, She obediently changed her clothes. As Julia walked out, Carlo kissed her, said love, and closed the doors. It was so nice to get away from this domestic routine. Julia just danced. She didn't think about anything. She rested her mind and body. This evening she enjoyed her freedom. She was coming home and didn't expect what was waiting for her there. "I'm home." She entered the apartment. "Did you have a good time?" Her drunken husband came out into the hallway. "Carlo, you let me go, didn't you?" She didn't know what was going on. "Yes, I did. I thought you'd say no, that you'd spend time with me." His tongue was slurring. "What's going on?" She went into the room. There was a table by the couch, and on it were some shots and a bottle. "I'm out. As you can see, I'm having fun. Who were you with?" He grabbed her arm. "What are you doing? You're hurting me." Fear appeared in her eyes. She remembered how her father used to beat her mother when she was a child. "Oh, you," he pushed her. Julia didn't wait for him to continue. She grabbed her shoes and ran out of the apartment. She didn't know where to go. There was only one option, the dorm. "Hello, can't you let me in?" she asked the janitor. If only for a visit. She looked at the desk clerks. "Thank you." Julia began to think about what she should do. When the former roommate came out to her, she quickly told her everything, asked her to find a way out. "So here is the address. There lives my good acquaintance. Say that from me and tell everything." She gave her a piece of paper. "Thank you." The girls hugged each other. Julia was scared to go because there was a guy there again, not a girl. But she had no other choice, so she went. "Hello," they met. Julia told Michael everything. He stepped in and let her spend the night. "Thank you." She thanked him in the morning she left. She thought she would never need his help again. Just as Julia thought, Carlo found her at her studies. While they were in public, he spoke to her affectionately, asked her questions, but without pressure. At home, it started all over again. The only consolation was that he was sober. "Why do you behave like this?" Julia could not understand in her head. Such a nice and caring before the wedding. A young man became inadequate as soon as he put a ring on his finger. "And you?" He asked her a counter question. "What about me?" She looked at him. The conversation was not working. "Going everywhere, unknown with whom and where you sleep. Tell me, where were you today?" He came very close. At a friend's, she didn't want to lie because it could be worse. You see, at a friend's, he emphasized the last syllable. Julia went to the kitchen. She didn't want to talk. It was all empty. The girl wouldn't prove anything. Carlo didn't go after her. After that, they didn't talk for about a week. And then Carlo came home with flowers. "What's the occasion?" Julia came out into the hallway. "I'm sorry, my love. I overreacted." He handed her the bouquet. Good, she really thought, that he understood and realized everything. But it didn't last long. There was a corporate party at her husband's work. "You're coming with me tomorrow," he told her. "I have an extreme session coming up. I can't not prepare for it." She looked up at her husband. "Nothing. One evening will not decide anything. Everyone will be there with their wives," insisted the young man. "All right," Julia agreed with him. The next day, she put on a beautiful dress, painted her eyes and lips, and went out to Carlo. "Wow, what a beauty you are." He opened his arms to hug her. "Let's go already," she laughed. The evening was fun. At first, everyone was just sitting around the tables, making speeches. Then the music started, and everyone got on the dance floor. Julia tried to behave so no one would say anything to her husband. "How I envy Carlo," a representative man approached her. "Yes," Julia turned to him, a smile on her face. "Yes." At that moment, slow music played. The man held out his hand to her. She didn't refuse. They started moving to the tune. At some point, Julia saw her husband. He was standing there, all red. His jaundices were going in different directions. "I'm sorry, I have to interrupt our dance," Julia said quickly to the stranger. "What a pity." He saw her off with his eyes. "What do you think you're doing?" Boiled Carlo. He was pretty drunk again. "Beloved, calm down." She was afraid that the scandal would start right here. "Let's go home." They walked towards the exit. The man who had just danced with Julia caught up with them. "Sorry, you left it." He held out the hairpin to her. "Thank you," she smiled. At this point, the young man couldn't take it anymore. He swung around and punched the man in the jaw with all his might. The man went flying, and for some reason, the image of Billy, whom her father had dragged into the room in bloody pants, came to Julia's mind. He yelled when he saw Julia running away from him. He caught up with her, waited for a cab to pull up, put her in the car, and they drove home. As always, Carlo was silent in front of anyone, but at home, he was on the loose. "Stop!" She yelled at the whole house, but no one could hear her. "What's wrong with you?" In the morning, Carlo went into the kitchen to get a drink of water. Julia was lying on the couch. When he didn't hear an answer, he walked over. He pulled the blanket open and recoiled, sat down next to her, grabbed his head. Julia lay there, her face resembling a bloody mess. "What have I done?" Carlo went to the phone and called an ambulance. Thank God the girl was alive. They put her in the hospital. As soon as Julia felt a little better, could see and walk, without asking anyone, the girl just ran out of there. She drove home to her parents' house, thinking that if Carlo was there looking for her, her father would still intercede. Whatever their relationship, she's his daughter. "Hey," she came in the house. "What happened to your face?" Her brother asked her from the door. "Nothing." She walked up the steps to her mom's house. Julia rushed to her Inga. She first hugged and then pulled her daughter aside to look. "It can't be," she cried. "Maybe. Apparently it's fate," she cried. "Everything will be all right. Ask your father for help. He won't refuse," the mother advised. The father, when his daughter turned to him, thought of nothing better than to send her out of the country. First, they formalized their divorce, and then Julia flew abroad for a few months. As expected, Carlo arrived. It was unclear why he procrastinated so long. Inga assumed he simply hadn't visited his wife in the hospital. "Where's my wife?" He burst into the house and was immediately punched in the face. "This is my house, and only I can raise my voice here." Jack came out to him. "Where's Julia?" Carlo clamped his nose. "That's something you'll never know," said the man sternly. "What are you keeping a guest on the doorstep?" Came out to them. "Arnold, come in." They all sat together in the house. In Carlo's hands was a glass with something strong. "Tell me, what happened?" Julia's brother said. Carlo began to mutter to himself that he was jealous and drunk. He couldn't help himself. "And the last time I broke the CEO's face, I got fired, and I couldn't get over it." He looked up at them. "Yeah, the story." Jack looked at him. He didn't know what to do. "Okay, Julia's not home. Here's my card. Come on, buddy. Go home. Call me if you need anything." Arnold escorted him out of the house. Carlo drove home. He had new friends now. Inga continued her existence in the house with her husband, son, and daughter-in-law. They were communicating with the girl already openly. Jack and Arnold let the situation go. "Mom, I'm pregnant." Diane came to her room one day. "Don't tell him. Have an abortion," the woman begged her. "What are you talking about? I want this baby." Her daughter-in-law's eyes bulged. "You wanted to marry Arnold too?" The woman shook her head again. "No, I'll give him a son, and he will calm down." The girl stood her ground. As you know, Inge didn't care anymore. She was waiting for her husband to hit her someday, so that she wouldn't wake up. Diana sat in her room. She wanted to share her joy with everyone. She decided to call an old friend. "Hello, Natalie," she said into the phone. "Diana, where have you been?" She was surprised to hear from her. "I got married and now I'm expecting a baby," she bragged. "How do you feel about us coming to visit you?" asked her friend. "I don't even know." She glanced at the door. "I don't want to hear anything. We'll come to your place tonight. You can meet your husband," Natalie said. "Arnold, we're having friends over tonight," she said quietly to her husband. "What friends do we have?" He was very surprised. "Mine from school." She thought he wouldn't mind. She had to socialize with someone. "Look at me." He gave her a look that sent shivers down her spine. Diana was glad he didn't forbid it. She got ready for the evening. Jack was frowning. Something had been weighing on him lately. "What's the party?" he asked. "We have friends coming," she said cheerfully, "and yes, you'll be a grandfather soon." After these words, she thought that the man would somehow be happy, but he just looked at her and passed by. "What did you just say?" Arnold was coming down the stairs. "Yes, you're going to be a dad. I wanted to surprise you." She expected her husband to hug or kiss her, but he, like his father, didn't react in any way. The friends arrived in the evening. When Diana saw that there were young men among them, she thought her husband would not be very happy. "Wow, What a house you have. Natalie walked everywhere. Inga came down the hall. No one had warned her that there would be guests, so she was immediately embarrassed. Who's that? A startled Natalie approached her friend. The mother-in-law, she said simply. What's wrong with her face? A common question that came up to everyone who saw her for the first time. Ignore it, Diana asked her. Okay. They continued the party. After the feast, everyone moved outside. There was going to be a kebab. Diana, wow, you got the guy. He came up to her and slapped her. What are you doing? She looked back so that her husband did not see, but at that moment she ran into his gaze. Friends, thank you for coming. Arnold immediately began to speak. But we haven't cooked the meat yet. We're all upset. We'll do it another time, Arnold promised. When everyone had left, he took his wife under his elbow and they returned to the house. His father was gone, away on business. What do you think you're doing? You brought your lover into the house so you can see what a dear my husband is? He attacked her. What are you talking about? Diana already knew how it would end. Inga heard shouting downstairs, came out of her room and went there. Arnold, leave her alone. She's expecting a baby. She approached her son. What? Who's yapping? He turned to the woman. Don't, shouted Diana. At that moment, the young man hit his mother in the face with such force that she flew to the stairs and bumped her head. Don't what? Arnold was already upset. Don't touch. She covered herself with her hands, but it was too late. You'll know how to bring men into the house. He sat down on the sofa. When neither his mother nor Diana got up from the floor, he got nervous. His father wasn't around to ask for advice. The young man stood up, walking over to the woman first, blood oozing from her head. Get up, he prodded his wife. Fuck you. Diana saw that she was bleeding too, only downstairs she understood. Fuck you. I'll go to you now. And again the shock and darkness. The woman and the girl woke up in the hospital. Inga had a severe concussion and Diana had lost her baby. What are you doing? Jack started yelling at his son. You weren't there. What was I supposed to do? The boy whined. Okay, we'll figure something out. He pulled out a briefcase. When the doctor came in to see Inge, she was lying there staring at him with empty eyes. Will you be writing a statement? He asked her. What statement? She pretended not to understand. I see. He left the room. Diana was crying. She knew she didn't want to be with this man anymore, but how to get rid of him, she didn't understand. I write a statement or we get a divorce. She gave him an ultimatum. We'll see. He wanted to say something to her, but he turned and left the room. We have to do something, Jack said to his son at home. What do you mean? Arnold didn't understand. With your mother, she's got a bad headache. She won't do anything now, the man was sure. What's the plan? The young man was ready to listen. First, you must divorce your wife. You do not need her, only problems, advised the father. Well, I was going to do that myself, he admitted. After that, find your new friend, Carlo, I think, who lived with Dashka. We will give him the most difficult task, the man said point by point. Understood, Arnold smiled. After the conversation with his father, he began to immediately put the plan into practice. First, he went and negotiated a divorce. It didn't take long. Hey, he walked into Diane's room. What do you want? She was very angry with him. Here, he put an envelope of money on the table. I filed for divorce, you're free. Here's some money for the first time. Did he say everything? She looked at him contemptuously. Yeah, he didn't even say goodbye. He just walked out of the room, that's all. After that, he looked at his mother. She was lying in bed smiling. He realized what his father was talking about. Arnold left the hospital and immediately called Carlo. An unemployed guy could use the money. You got it? He talked to him. Yes, as soon as you call, I will be at your place, promised the young man. That was the end of their agreement. It remained to wait for Inga to be discharged from the hospital. They didn't have to wait long. Not even 2 weeks later, she was already home. Hi, Jack said hello to her. She just walked past him, humming something to herself. Crazy, Arnold said it after her. Shut up, his father put his finger to his lips. In the evening, Carlo arrived. Now listen carefully, Jack began to say. Now you go to your ex-mother-in-law. Tell her you want to talk. As if you feel bad after the divorce with Dashka. Cry, bring tea. Beforehand, Dissolve this in hot liquid. No one will ever figure it out. After his words, Jack gave Carlo a capsule with a clear liquid. Do I have to kill her? The boy was frightened. Think about it. Arnold showed him a thick envelope with money. And why do you need it? Did not understand the young man. After her death, we will receive the inheritance, said Jack. I see. Carlo understood everything now. Today, he spent the night in this house, and for tomorrow the plan was to be executed. Carlo went to Inga's room after lunch. He asked if he could come in. She smiled. Hello. He entered then uninvited. Come in. She sat him on a chair. Do you remember me? I'm your daughter's ex-husband. He was nervous, and Inge sat looking at him, happiness on her face. And then Carlo started crying. How bad he felt, how tired he was, and all the other things Jack had told him. How about some tea? He asked. Wouldn't say no. She looked at him. Now he left the room. In the kitchen he did as he was told. There's our tea. He brought a tray of cups and cookies into the room. Look, I had a delicious roll in the cupboard, the woman asked. Okay, he got up, but he didn't find any roll there. Well, I have to go. They finished their tea. The young man got up from his seat and went to the door. At that moment, the woman just fell off her chair. Carlo came down the stairs. He was happy. Arnold handed him his fee. After that, he advanced home. What now? The son looked at his father. We'll wait until night and take her out into the woods, the man said. Until then, Inga lay on the floor. All evening, Arnold agonized over what would happen to them if anything came to light. But he looked at Jack and realized that if he was calm, there was nothing to worry about. When night fell, they loaded the woman's body into the car and drove away. They drove far away so that no one they knew would find her. This would be fine, Jack said. His plan was to leave the woman here and report her missing a few days later. Doctors would confirm that she was insane, left home on her own, got lost, froze, and died. That's it, we have no more burdens. The man shook off his hands. You're right, they got in the car and drove home. Early in the morning, the forester went around his property, looking to see if anything was caught in the traps. When he reached the edge of the forest, he saw a beast lying on the ground and came closer. Lord, he began to be baptized. He sat down and looked at the woman. He didn't know what to do with her. The old man pulled up his wagon. He loaded the woman into it. He was afraid that he would be blamed for the death of this unfortunate woman. He saw that on the outskirts of the city, there was a place where homeless people were fed and hot lunches were brought to them. So he decided to take the woman there. Who are you? Inga opened her eyes, and several overgrown and bad-smelling people were leaning over her. We found you here, squeaked one of them. And whom am I? She looked at her hands. She's not well at all, said an old man with a large beard. He might not have been an old man, but the look of him said so. Inga was lifted to her feet, dizzy and cold. She was shivering. Come with me. The same man held out his hand to her. Good. There was no tooth on tooth. Inge poured hot tea, so she joined the company. Don't you remember anything at all? Her new friends asked her. No, she shook her head and smiled all the time. Poor thing, everyone felt sorry for her. Everyone here was friendly. If food was brought in, pandemonium ensued. But when a cup of hot food fell into Inga's hands, she simply enjoyed it. She had a warm jacket. It was a few sizes too big, but it was so warm. Come on, a man called out to her. Apparently, he was not all right in the head either, because he kept telling everyone that he was an academician. With him, Inga began to communicate closely. They were always together, sleeping, eating. Where did you lose your fiancé? The volunteers laughed. Who brought hot lunches? None of your business, Inga answered them. Now she didn't look any different from her companions. She was wearing the same rags. It was impossible to walk in them, but no one offered her anything else. And where were you from? Sometimes Inga asked the boys, who were so kind as to pour tea and offer bread. From the city, they didn't want to talk to her. I used to live in the city too. The woman rolled her eyes. Good, they didn't believe it. In the evening, Steve, with whom Inga was always together, offered her a bottle. Where did you get it? The woman wondered. It's not there anymore. He squinted slyly and took a sip. Come on, Inga wanted to warm up. It was winter ahead. It was getting colder. After a short conversation, Steve suggested that Inga leave this company and live alone. "Don't tell me you're taking me to your academic apartment," laughed the woman. "Look at Hugh. What kind of academic would look at Hugh?" He showed his toothless mouth as he smiled. But still, they made it. Moved closer to the city. Here you could beg by the subway and beg around caves. "Well, aren't you sorry?" Steve looked at his companion. "Soon it will be winter. What are we going to do? Go to the basement?" Inga asked him once. "Why didn't you say anything before?" "Exactly, it's warm there." The man tapped himself on the forehead. They came to one of the houses. The cellar was open, not like in many other houses. They settled there for a while. Now Inga didn't refuse when Steve brought a bottle. Once she took not one sip, but two. "What are you doing?" He poked her in the chest. "Leave me alone," the woman said in a drunken voice. "Oh, you," he pushed her. Inga collapsed on her side, lay like that. Sometimes she saw the janitor sweeping the yard, thought that she could also. Maybe they would have allocated a place for housing. But she didn't dare to come up and ask. That's how she lived with Steve. "What's up, old girl?" He coming all stinky and wet. "Where have you been?" She was very hungry. He wanted to say something else, but he took a step, stumbled, and fell. Inga came out of the cellar. It was very cold. She wrapped herself in the same jacket that she had once gotten. The woman was walking down the street. Everyone was avoiding her. She was very hungry and warm. Inga did not know how long she wandered like that. She entered some yard. She wanted to find a cellar to warm up a little. She went to the entrance. It was very slippery. Inga didn't realize how she slipped and fell to the ground. What happened next is unknown. Selena lived with her mom. She wanted to get married or at least find a young man who would take her away from home. Everything was fine until recently when her mother brought a man into the house. "Mom, he's hitting on me," peeping in the shower, complained her daughter to her. "What are you talking about?" The woman didn't believe her. She was so happy that in her old age she had met a life partner. Her daughter had grown up. She was in college. It was time to think about her own life. "Find someone else," her mother told her. "Yes, you think that someone would be waiting for me around the corner?" Selena answered her sadly. "Well, let's get you an apartment." The woman offered the last argument she had. "You what? Where is the money from?" was surprised daughter. "Lenia said he would help," she parried. "Well, if he helps, then I agree finally. Her dream will come true, and she will live alone." As soon as the girl moved out, she began a completely different life. Now she could eat or not eat before her mother pointed it out, bring her friends to visit, and everything else. "Selena, you've blossomed," Mickey, who she had liked for a long time, told her. Like? She wanted him to go out with her or come and visit. Yeah, he didn't ask or say anything else. He just stood there silent. "Come and visit me," she plucked up the courage. "Why, and I will come," he revived. "So I'm waiting for you tonight," she blushed. At home, Selena cooked unpretentious dishes, expecting that the guy would come hungry, because students are all like that, and so he did. "Hi," he stood there glowing like a new dollar. "Come in," she greeted him cordially. The young people went to the kitchen. There the girl immediately began to put dishes on a plate. After that, they moved to the room. "Wow, you have parents, Kata rented?" He looked around. "Yes, the mother did not want me to disturb her, did not want to talk about it, girl." "I see," he turned to her. "Why didn't you notice me before?" she asked him bluntly. "Did you see what you were wearing?" "I did, but in a different way," he laughed. "Fool," she turned away. "Do not be offended. I understand that you live with your mother. Most likely, it is her merit." He stopped laughing and put his hand on the back of the sofa so that a little touched the girl. "Okay, let's watch a movie. I made beer and chips." She got up, went to the fridge, and brought everything to the table. The evening was very heartwarming. Selena realized that she liked him for a reason. He was exactly what she needed in her life. The next day, Mickey was again at the girl's house. I missed him. She met him in a funny homemade suit. And me, he handed her a teddy bear. "Why did you spend the money? Already probably not enough." She hugged him. At that moment, the guy pulled her against him. She looked up, and at that moment, Mickey started kissing her. From that day on, the lovers never parted again. "Are you going to school?" she asked him. "No, I don't want to." He stretched his hands to her, and when they made contact, The girl found herself in bed with the guy, and they weren't going anywhere together today. "We can't do this. We're in our final year. We have to get our diplomas at any cost," Selena said. "Nothing is going to happen over one day." Mickey kissed her. It felt so good, so warm in his arms. She watched and couldn't believe they were really together. "Why don't we go visit your mom?" Mickey suggested it. "Are you ready to propose?" She was happy. "Why not?" "Not yet, though." He wasn't looking her in the eye. "What's the matter?" The girl didn't understand. "No, just," he spread his hands. Selena didn't want to take Mickey's mom to visit unannounced. She'd called, said they were coming over. Her mother had gotten excited. Then the girl let Mickey know about it. How exciting they were going. "I don't see what the big deal is," she shrugged. "Hello." They entered the house where the girl's mother lived. "Hurry, things would soon get cold." The mother was waiting for them. Richard was already sitting at the table. He was smiling. "Well, what, daughter, are you going to get married?" her mother asked her. "Wait, we haven't finished our studies yet." Selena made a serious face. "It's okay. You'll get your diplomas, get a job, and then you'll start renting an apartment yourself, and you'll get married," the woman reasoned. To be honest, Selena didn't expect anything else from her. She looked sadly at the woman who had loved her as a child, strictly brought her up in her youth, and now what? That Richard had come along and everything had gone to shit. "We should probably go." The girl stood up. She looked at Mickey. "Where to?" "We haven't tried anything yet." You could see that the guy was getting into the confidence of his future mother-in-law. "There, you see, the guy says smart things." Got the mother on his side. "Good." Sat back down Selena. After that, it was only Mickey who talked at the table. He talked about his academic success and everything else. In the evening, they finally left the apartment. "Why did you want to go and visit them?" Selena wondered. "Just to get acquainted." It seemed like he was really telling the truth. Well, they came home. There was no mood to talk about anything. As time went on, school continued. Things with Mickey became monotonous. Before, they were always going out, having fun. But now they were just sitting at home. "Mickey, we used to have fun together at home," she told him. "What's different now?" He didn't understand. That was it. She couldn't help herself. That evening, the guy got up and left. Selena cried, tried to call him, but he didn't answer. What was going on in her life? Why was she like this? She'd gone from being a kind, helpful girl to some kind of freak. She thought it over, and the next day, while studying, Selena approached Mickey. "I'm sorry," I snapped. "It's all come up, Mom, the house parties." She stood in front of him guilty. "Come here, I'm sorry too." He hugged her. From that moment on, they had a different relationship. By graduation, the guy proposed to Selena. He became something else altogether. He'd go out at night, come back late. Selena felt sorry for him, thought he was depressed. Congratulations, she kissed her husband-to-be, both holding diplomas. And he was happy. A very different happy life was beginning, Selena thought. But it turned out that this happiness was only her own idea. "When are we going to apply?" she asked Mickey. "I don't know. You want to do it tomorrow," he shrugged. Selena looked at him. He was always sad. Nothing was working out for him, or he didn't want to do anything. She found a job quickly. The pay was good. The staff was normal. "That's it. There is nowhere to pull. Let's go to the registry office." One evening, she said to him. "Come on," he followed her like a dog. "Mickey, I can't take it anymore. Tell me what's going on." She couldn't understand it. "It's okay." That's all he answered her. "I can see something's happened to you." Selena stopped in the middle of the street. She didn't go anywhere that day. "Mashka, hi, can I come over?" she called her friend. Of course, she agreed. That evening, Selena and Maria sat in her kitchen and drank wine. The girl told and told. She was crying. She couldn't stop. "What are you so killed? Sit down and talk." The friend was incomprehensible. "What is difficult about it?" "He doesn't talk to me, you know." Selena raised her tearful eyes. She got home late. Mickey was already asleep. The girl lay down next to her. Cats were scratching at her soul. That day started as usual, but how it would end, the girl could not even guess. "Selena, we need to talk to you," Mickey told her at breakfast this morning. "It's about time." She looked at him. "I'm leaving," he said. "What?" She even got up from her chair. "I have another." He lowered his eyes to the floor. Mickey, don't lie to me. Tell me what's wrong with our relationship. She couldn't believe it. The night you and I had our fight and I left, I met a girl at the bar. I don't know how it happened. We were drinking heavily. We went to her house. That's where it happened. After that, she started calling. I answered. He told it like he was being interrogated. So, if you don't want to, you don't have to be with her, do you? She couldn't understand what was happening. She was dizzy. She's having my baby, he said at the end. God, how could this happen? Selena cried. Mickey was packing his things, and Selena was getting ready for work. She was walking down the street, and she didn't realize how just like that, in an instant, her happy life had been blown to pieces. At the office, she went up to her floor. Her co-worker friends were there, all friendly. They were acting strangely that day. Selena, come in to see me, her boss called out to her. Yeah, she came to see her. You see, there is a redundancy and I have to fire you because you are new, you have just arrived, said the boss, and Selena's ears were ringing so loudly that she couldn't listen anymore. She gathered her things, which weren't much, and went home. It was cold outside, but she didn't feel it. When she approached her driveway, she saw a homeless woman lying in the snow. At first the girl passed by. She didn't want to get involved, but when she entered the entrance, she stopped. And it's me, she said out loud. Today, I was thrown out on the street like that, first by a guy and then at work. She turned around, walked out of the entrance, and approached the poor guy. Can you stand up? She leaned over her. When the woman did not answer, she dragged her into the entranceway, which she managed with difficulty. The snow was easy, but then the hard part began. Selena was exhausted to the point of tears, but she did it. The woman was warm now. I hope you are doing well. She got up and walked. She heard the woman moan. Are you very sick? Said the girl and took a few more steps. Help, said the homeless woman to her. And where did all this come from today? She came back. Can you get up? Again she repeated her. She realized that she could not drag her to the floor. Give me your hand. Inga couldn't open her eyes. Everything was spinning in front of her. Get up. Selena grabbed the railing so she had a foothold and gave her other hand to the woman. She somehow got up. Selena, overcoming her disgust, led the tramp to her home. I'll do a good deed. Maybe karma will get better, she said aloud. At home, she put the old woman on a chair and brought her some water. When the woman took off her shoes, the landlady plugged her nose. God, when was the last time you bathed? She asked rhetorically. Is there anything hot to eat? The woman asked. Now come in. The girl even liked the whole situation. Now she would come home, would be alone, crying, suffering, remembering, and so, at least some company and no time to think. Inga took off her jacket, which had grown attached to her, and followed the girl. Here, the soup, yesterday cooked, she said, and then thought that she probably ate worse, smiled. Inga ate the soup as if she had never tasted anything better in her life. Take your things off, I'll throw them away and find you something else, Selena asked, because when they got into the warmth, they started to smell so fragrant it made her eyes water. Wow. She saw the scars on the tramp's body. You've been through a lot. Don't mind her. Inga was standing in front of her completely naked. Who did that to you? Selena got up, went to the room, brought a robe, but did not give it back, but made the old woman go to wash herself. Why did you let me in? Inga asked the girl. I could steal something from you. Take it. She waved her hands. No, I don't need anything. Thanks for everything. Can I have my jacket back? She got up from the chair. No, I will not let you go anywhere. The landlady realized that today in this woman she found salvation from her suffering. You have a husband, children. How will they understand all this? Asked Inga. I have no one. At this point, all the pain came to her throat, and she burst into tears. Don't. Inga wanted to approach her, but she understood that she could be unpleasant to this young person. It was all right, and she began to pour out what had happened to her. Everyone's life is hard, Inga said. Yes, I would never have thought that this could happen to me, the girl sobbed one last time. It seemed that all the resentment that was there came out with those tears. Maybe I should go after all, Inga asked. No, stay. Live a little. Tell me your story. It will be easier. At some point in her head, a stray thought flashed through her mind. What if she just lacks a caring mom who could listen to her in the kitchen and feel sorry for her? Thank you. You're a very kind person, the woman said. Selena made her a bed on the floor and lay down on the bed herself. They did not speak again that evening. Both were exhausted. They went to bed. In the morning, Selena didn't need to be anywhere else. She got up and smelled the smell from the kitchen. What are you doing here? She walked in and saw the cheesecakes on the table. She took one, and though it was very hot, she took a bite. Eat. Don't hurry, said the woman gently. Who brought you here? Laughed the girl. I don't know, and you to me? Inga sat down opposite her. We didn't even get acquainted with you yesterday, the landlady said. My name is Inga, said the woman. And I'm Selena. Tell me what happened to you, she asked. It's a very long story, sighed the guest. I don't need to go anywhere. I'm in no hurry, I think you are too, laughed Selena. Okay, nodded the one. It started a long time ago. How long? Selena began to speculate in her mind. If she looks like that, then how many years has she been suffering? Not as long as you might think. Inga smiled softly. Okay, I'm listening, nodded her interlocutor. About 30 years ago, gave out the woman and looked at the girl's reaction. What, you were young then? So you are not so many years old. Why then? She shut her mouth with her hand. I met my future husband, she began to tell, and got to the point where he came back from prison. What, straight cut off? The girl looked with big eyes. I don't know, I didn't go into details. Only after that I had hell on earth. As soon as my husband and son did not mock me, she tilted her head. A stingy tear rolled from her eye. And how did you survive all this? The girl was silent. I don't know, I even tried to hang myself, but I didn't have the will, she said, asking him to let me go, but Jack kept me at home like a slave. And then it happened that my son attacked his wife. I interceded. He pushed me away, hit my head, ended up in the hospital. Terrible. Those were the only words Selena said. But for me, it was a step to salvation. When I woke up, I pretended like something was wrong and I didn't understand anything. I smiled all the time and did things I didn't understand. At home, they stopped taking me seriously, didn't pay attention to me, and I just needed it. She was getting angry with every word, so she was angry at the men in her family. I see, Spinall rubbed her hands. Yes, so they planned to get rid of me. They were discussing the plan. I wanted to come down at that moment. I heard it and froze. My ex-brother-in-law was going to poison me. I prepared myself. While he was in my room, I switched the capsule in his pocket for an ordinary sleeping pill. When I drank tea, of course, I fell down. They thought the deed was done. Inga stopped, drank tea, looked at Selena. And what next? She was already so engrossed that she was interested in everything else. I'd of course do not know it, but I can guess. I was taken to the forest. Imagine my own son. Okay, husband, but a bloodline. I do not understand. I woke up from the cold, heard footsteps, got scared, pretended to be unconscious again. A man came over. I was so afraid he would take me to the hospital. They would find out who I was and bring me back to that wretched house again, she sobbed. Yes, that's quite a story, Selena marveled. But he turned out to be a coward, scared of something, took me to the tramps that lived on the outskirts. And then I had to play amnesia. The people who brought the food were always asking around. Who, what was their name? To help them find relatives, and I didn't want that. Let it be with vagrants, but I'm free. No one pokes me. No one commands me. She stopped again to drink tea. How did you end up here? It's far from the outskirts. Selena was already head over heels in that story. To be honest, it's not a good story. I don't want to tell it. I'm disgusted. You saw what I was like when I came here. She looked at her new acquaintance. Stay here. I won't tell anyone about you, said Celine. I need your help, Inga asked. Sure, whatever you want. The girl turned to listen. Need a good lawyer, I later, but I can pay. Waited for an answer after this question. I have one acquaintance. She remembered about Richard, Mom's boyfriend. He was just engaged in legal affairs. If you help me, you won't regret it, the woman said. All right, I'll try to talk him into it, the girl promised her. After that, everyone went about their business. Selena left the house after a couple of hours, and Inga just sat in an armchair and read a book. She thought everything over. The main thing was to get help, because Jack could do a lot. He agrees. Selena came home. What did you tell him? Inga wondered. Nothing of what you told me. Just pressed on pity, admitted the girl. Well then, the war begins, clenched her fist the one who had been bullied all her life. There was so much anger at the native people that even words cannot express. Richard, when he came to visit, he doubted for a long time that this client would be able to pay him. But he liked the story so much that he decided to take the case. You and I will file a statement, indicate there that they abused you, tried to kill you, and everything else? Asked the man. Yes, that's right, she agreed with him. Do you have any witnesses to any of this? It was important. Yes, the ex-sister-in-law. The doctors can give extracts with all the references. Inga began to enumerate. Great, consider it a done deal. He snapped his fingers. The case had begun, but Jack and Arnold didn't know it yet. After they took the mother and wife out into the woods, they waited a few days to report them missing. When this happened, the son began to tell them that his mother, with her sick head, kept asking to be taken to one place or another. He was asked to show these places. First, they went to the market, then somewhere else, and the third object was the forest. But no matter how many times they looked, there was no body. Did the wolves eat her? Arnold wondered when he talked to his father. Nothing. Soon time will pass, they will consider her missing, and we will still get the inheritance, his father reassured him. Of course, without a death certificate, no one would give them anything. They lurked and waited for the time to pass when the woman would be reported missing. Why don't you find out anything? Arnold was nervous. Why should I go to the trouble? His father didn't understand. Their hands were tied now. They had to sit quietly to keep themselves uncovered. The doorbell rang. Jack got up and went to open it. On the threshold stood a solid man. Hello, my name is Richard. I represent your wife, Inga. He said everything at once. What wife? She disappeared a few months ago. The man stood looking at him. I don't know. Here is her statement. She instructed me to sue you and to handle the case. The lawyer spoke politely. I don't understand anything. Come in. You could see how the hands of the master of life trembled. Here, you can familiarize yourself with everything here. He held out a folder with documents to Jack. Arnold was curious too, so he came over. It's all the ravings of a madman, he said. My wife has been having trouble with her head lately. That's not true, and the doctors can confirm that she's fine. He pulled out a certificate. What's going on here? The man turned to his son. He only shrugged his shoulders in response. Well, I've notified you. The lawsuit has been filed. Wait for the summons. I don't advise you to run away. Richard smiled before leaving. And what, tell me, what were their faces like? Celine couldn't wait for the man. Though she disliked him, it didn't matter now. What do you think? He laughed. Can you imagine? They are sitting waiting for the inheritance to pass into their hands, and then on top of that, the lawsuit, laughed the girl. Stop it. He who laughs well, said Inga. She sat and listened to Richard. She had the same joy in her soul, but she was not used to show it. Great. I think we're in a winning position. The man said goodbye to them and drove home. He's nice, Inga said. And what he takes you all for, snorted the girl. They waited for the lawyer to call. The woman needed clothes to look decent at the trial. Selena decided to splurge. She trusted the lady. The hearing was scheduled in a month. When Jack saw Inga, his eyes almost popped out of his orbits. She wasn't as beautiful as she used to be, but she held herself with pride. Mother, how can you slander your own son? Arnold shouted at her. And when you beat and humiliated her, did you think about it? Selena put in her word. Who are you? Who are you anyway? You've got your mom's money, so you made it all up. They shouted until they were stopped. Richard was the one who had it all in his hands. The men were sentenced to 12 and 13 years. They kept their heads down and sat like that for the rest of the trial. I'll get out. I'll kill you. Jack turned to her and gestured it all away. No way, Selena reassured Inga. Arnold was crying. He didn't want to go there at all. He was weak, especially, and his father wouldn't be around. True to form, whispered his mother as he walked past her. By the way, why didn't you mention Carlo, your son-in-law? Selena asked her when they were already out. He was a pawn like many in their game, the woman muttered. What will you do now? The girl asked. Invite you to visit me. Inga was happy. They had come to this big house that she had dreamed of so much when she was young. Now she hated the place. Wow, Selena walked around admiring it. Baby, don't you think you're getting fat? Or is it something else? The woman asked her. The girl stopped, she thought, counting to herself. It can't be. She looked at the woman as if the woman had told her some universal secret. We should get it checked out, Inga advised her doctor. As Selena left, she would be gone for hours. The woman sat down at the phone. Julia, hi, she dialed her daughter's number. Mommy, you can't imagine how much I've missed you, she cried into the phone. Come home, now everything is calm here, said and smiled the mistress of a huge fortune. With pleasure, but I'm not alone, she stopped talking. Okay, I'll accept anyone, laughed Mom. After that, she did not calm down and called Diana. You? She couldn't believe her ears. Can you come over? Her ex-mother-in-law asked her. I'm not going to your house anymore. The girl began to refuse. Come now, it's my house, reassured her Inga. If so, then wait, promised Diana. Selena returned happy. Even if it's just a small piece of Pasha's life, she said to her new good friend. Will you stay? The woman asked her. What are you suggesting? The girl couldn't believe it. Soon all my dear people will gather. You will give birth. A grandchild will appear. She touched her stomach. I had to pick up a homeless woman in my yard. Selena couldn't believe it. What's the big deal? Kindness is always reciprocated with kindness. Inga hugged her. They began to clean the huge house, which had not been cleaned for many years. A lot of things had been thrown out, rearranged. And let's make separate rooms for everyone, the landlady suggested. What do you mean? The girl didn't understand her. A nursery for the baby, a bedroom for my daughter with a young man, a boudoir for my former daughter-in-law, and for you too. Inga was glad that now she could do everything here as she wanted. I don't believe in all this at all, was still fascinated by Selena. Richard and his wife were also invited to celebrate the housewarming. Julia came with her fiancé. The latter took along a friend who had dreamed of seeing Russia all his life. Diana was also here when Inga told her everything. She couldn't believe it, that it was true. Selena, can I talk to you? Michael said in very bad Russian. Yes, what did you want? She turned and walked over to him. Why you? He corrected her. Okay, she blushed. You are very beautiful, he complimented her and led her into the garden. Are you asking to stay here in our country? She was joking. What? He didn't understand her. No reason. I'm joking, laughing, she smiled. You'll make a good couple, she approved of Michael's choice. Well, how are the rooms? Selena couldn't wait to find out, because she'd done everything with her own hands. Great, especially mine, Diana smiled. Here's what I want to tell you, friends, stood up from the seat Inga. All invited here can stay here to live. I will not interfere. It's embarrassing, said Diana. It's okay. You've suffered so much for my son. You need to live like in paradise, said her former mother-in-law. What about you? Richard asked Selena. While Michael is here, I'll stay, and then we'll see. They held hands. Look how two people could make so many people happy. They should have just disappeared. The woman laughed. They sat back down at the table and talked and laughed for a long time more. Selena stayed to live with Inga. Things worked out well for them with Michael. When he found out that the girl was pregnant, at first he was frightened. How could it be possible? Because they only kissed. In fact, he was so funny. For a while they went to this place to make the documents and then came back. Here we go, Selena screamed in the middle of the night. A car arrived quickly and the girl was taken to the maternity hospital. A large number of people waited outside the hospital to see how it would go. I never thought that my daughter would have such a big family, her mother said. She finally realized that she had behaved wrongly. Look, Richard pointed at the girl in the white coat who was coming toward them. What? Who? The customers started clamoring. I congratulate you. You have a grandson, a son, a nephew. She moved her gaze from one person to another. Thank you, Selena. Congratulations. They all started shouting together. Now you better go home and tomorrow morning come back. The young mother needs to rest, the nurse advised them. Okay, see you tomorrow. Everyone went to Inga's house. It didn't matter that it was night. Now this group was so united, stronger than some family ties. My dears, I invite you to the table. They entered the hall of the big house.
Noticing that a millionaire was throwing away a cupboard, the tramp decided to take it for himself. but looking inside MP4. It is now an unremarkable man living in an old, abandoned and dilapidated house, known in several neighboring villages as Matt. But once he was known by a different name, Mr. Matthew. He was referred to by grateful patients and respected physician colleagues. A rehabilitation physician, Matthew taught at the local university and had an extensive medical practice. People traveled to him from neighboring areas, as he had a reputation as a specialist who could get almost anyone doomed to a wheelchair back on their feet. But at one point, life took a wrong turn. His beloved wife, as in a bad anecdote, was caught cheating with a friend who was a supervisor in the very hospital where Matthew worked, the head of the department. As a result of the scandal with his once beloved wife, the man found himself on the street, as the flat was inherited by his ex-wife from her parents. From the hospital, he was survived by a former friend who now lived in a 4-room flat in the center, where Matthew and his wife used to live. All this broke the wounded and sensitive doctor, who lived with the certainty that if you live according to conscience, then fate will never turn to your unsavory side. Alcohol, detachment from life, and endless self-pity led him to an old house on the outskirts of the settlement, where he lived alone, not letting anyone from the city, where nothing else held him. He had gone to the region. As there in the village, it was possible to rent a small ramshackle house for a pittance. The proximity to nature and the absence of the noise of the crowd enticed him to choose his place of residence. He wanted to escape from everything from his past life, from acquaintances who were in it, even from himself. Alcohol entered his life tightly. Every day started with a glass of low-quality hot drink. At the beginning of his new life, he had money the remnants of his former wealth, but soon his reserves began to run out. He moved out of his rented house to a long abandoned house on the outskirts. The locals said that a lonely old woman had lived there, and after her death the house was untouchable and stood boarded up. Of course, it was frequented by local boys looking for privacy and drunks looking for profit, but Mr. Matthew was able to keep it relatively tidy and fix what was broken. Fortunately, his hands were golden, though that talent had now dissolved into the addiction he had brought himself into. He supported his modest existence with occasional earnings from the locals, some to dig a vegetable garden, some to chop wood, and some to clean animal cages. At night, ashamed of himself, he would sneak through the woods to the rubbish dump adjacent to the expensive village where the cottages of the local elite of the city and region stood. Mr. Matthew lived on the outskirts of the settlement, through the woods, a kilometer and a half away from which was the local Rublevka. There was always something to be had in the rubbish dumps of this gated community, so Matthew was a frequent visitor there. When he saw the local oligarch throwing out a cupboard, Matthew was surprised, since when did the owners themselves, not the servants, take out the rubbish? And it was a good cabinet. Curiosity, natural wit, and instincts told him to keep his head down, not to reveal himself, but to wait until Mr. Stone left in his car. As soon as the car rounded the corner, Matthew ran out of his hiding place and ran to the cupboard. At first he thought he heard a groan, but when he opened the door, there was no longer any doubt a young woman was lying in the cupboard, wounded and tormented. The moan was faint and was not repeated. But at first it seemed to the doctor that it was her last dying breath. As was his habit, he began to feel for a pulse. It was hard to feel, but there was one. The woman was close to death. She needed urgent medical attention. Her entire body was mutilated and she was barely breathing. Clearly she had been dumped for a reason, and clearly with no hope of anyone finding her while she was still alive. And Mr. Stone may simply not have realized that the woman was not yet dead and was desperately clinging to her last hope of life. Pictures of possible scenarios flashed rapidly through the man's mind. One thing remained constant: the oath he had taken, the doctor's oath. He could not leave this woman on a cold October evening here in this condition. Mr. Matthew knew perfectly well the routine of local life. No one was ever here on a Saturday night, and on Sunday mornings there was no cleaning, which meant no rubbish was thrown away. If he left it as it was, the woman's cold corpse would be discovered Monday afternoon, at the earliest. He wouldn't dare call for help either. And it's not even about the lack of money on his mobile phone, because he had been drinking heavily, and once again, as had happened many times before, forgot to pay for the connection to call an ambulance or the police, but because to do so would be tantamount to signing the woman's death warrant. As soon as it turns out who threw out the cupboard with the surprise, then immediately the servants will run to inform the owner about what happened, and the woman will have no chance at all. There was no hope of a decent doctor or policeman. I would have to become a good Samaritan myself. Taking a breath and trying to calm himself down, Mr. Matthew pulled himself together and went to fetch his trolley, which he usually used to carry his finds. Today he would obviously be taking home something very different from what he had hoped for. Carefully, with all due caution, he began to move the body onto the trolley, but the woman still reacted instantly. Apparently the wounds were serious, and every touch caused pain throughout her body. The journey to the place Mr. Matthew was now forced to consider home was already a long one for an elderly man, and considering the weight of the burden, the journey took about 3 hours. As best he could, he wrapped the woman up to keep her warm from the cold, for he found her in a tank top and tights, if it could be called that. After what had happened to her, the clothes hadn't kept their original appearance either. All the way Mr. Matthew gingerly eyed his new problem, heard her moans and pondered what had happened. He thought the woman looked familiar to him, though anything was possible in this darkness, and given how much his new patient's face had been altered by the efforts of some sadist. Though there was little doubt that the name of the sadist was Mr. Stone. Finally reaching his lodgings, the doctor was able to exhale a little. It was unlikely that even if his ward was searched for, she would be found here. Now it remained to carefully examine the wounds and injuries, to assess what he could do at home, which was far from sterile, and what he would need to do it. The second issue was, of course, the acquisition of the drugs, materials, and devices he needed to help him. He had a small amount of money stashed away, but immediately the realization turned on that there was no way he could purchase at once, and in one place close to here. It's clear Mr. Stone wanted to get rid of the body. Either he figured the woman was already dead, or he didn't want to mess around and dumped her in sub-zero temperatures, and was sure that with her injuries she wouldn't survive the night. Either way, he would await news of the discovery of the corpse, and when that didn't happen, would seek information. And it was absolutely impossible to draw attention to himself. It was surprising that such an unusual, dangerous, and extraordinary case had, for the first time in years, stifled the urge to drink and feel sorry for himself. He only felt sorry for this young woman now, and he wanted to do everything he could to help her. Taking a closer look at her, he found nothing unusual during his examination. A woman of about 35, slim, even athletic, but all in all, nothing special. Mr. Matthew, like everyone else in the area, knew by sight the man who had dumped the cupboard, and he knew he didn't frequent the neighboring upscale community. Yes, he had bought himself the coolest plot of land with a huge modern cottage and access to the river. But as far as everyone knew, he was a rare guest in his house, and when he visited, he came with girls of a completely different type, young and beautiful. Not a single operation of cosmetological procedures, dressed in fashionable clothes, or rather even undressed according to the latest fashion. How accurate the rumors were, our Mr. Matthew didn't know, but it was said that the girls never repeated themselves. Mr. Stone always arrived with a new one. All in all, the situation seemed as strange and implausible as possible. But since he had taken the responsibility and the courage, there was nothing else to do. It was necessary to act. After some thought, Mr. Matthew made a list of all the essentials and thought about where to buy them without attracting attention. The first buses would be leaving soon, and it would be necessary to be among the first passengers so that he could go round all the points he had planned and buy everything he needed. He had already done what he could without the auxiliary materials. He has cut and carefully stripped the wretched woman of the remnants of her clothing, examined all her wounds. But it's clear that antibiotics, IVs, and cervical kits are needed here for even minimal care. And that's still with the hope that all he saw was a single injury, and there were no internal ones he couldn't help with under any circumstances. For now, all he could do was wash the wounds, treat them with vodka, something, and there was plenty of that goodness. For the rest, he would have to go as soon as possible. With one last look at the source of his new problems, he left the house. He wasn't able to return until the evening. I really hope my help is still relevant and the woman is alive, thought Mr. Matthew Pattison, although he did not find any swelling typical of internal injuries. But it was impossible to rule out that possibility. Plus, he didn't know that the victim might have been injected with something that would guarantee death before being thrown away. It was with a heavy heart that he walked from the bus stop to his house with a rucksack of everything he needed. Spent the last of his money on it. The last cord went to the shop and bought a basic set of groceries to feed his new patient. Of course, she won't be able to eat right away and won't be on nutrition, IVs, and all the necessary things he took. But chicken broth is also a thing indispensable for those who need to recuperate. As soon as she starts to regain consciousness, it will be necessary to take care of her. Fortunately, Vasily Nikiforovich found the woman alive. The sheet he had covered her with was all bunched up. Sweat was beading on her forehead, clearly fever from the infection. Having quickly laid out everything necessary, the doctor began manipulations that could save her life. 2 weeks passed in care and aspirations for the patient. He did not drink a drop of alcohol. During this time he slept intermittently. As the woman had one crisis followed by another, he was afraid to leave her side. The situation stabilized only on the 16th day. During all this time he did not hear a single word from his ward. Only moans and quiet mumbling and delirium during the first nights when the situation was at its most critical. The patient opened her eyes, suddenly, and staring at the back of the man who had saved her with horror. The doctor turned round at the feeling of someone looking intently at him, and almost jumped, startled by the fear in her eyes. "Hush. I didn't hurt you. I am helping you. Don't worry," he spoke, panting. Vasily Nikiforovich saw many different patients who were unlucky in life and who were brought to his office by the curves of their fate. They were both victims of car accidents and victims of crime. But he could not remember such eyes. He physically felt pain from that look, as if the whole world had been destroyed in front of his patient's eyes, and that pain was bursting out through the look. From then on they existed in silence. The patient did not speak at all. The doctor tried to talk to her, but it was all in vain, and he stopped. He did everything he could to make her well enough to get back on her feet. Compresses, drips, gymnastics, exercises, nutrition. He gave her everything, devoted himself to her life, found a new meaning to his existence. He thanked himself for the fact that, despite his pernicious addiction to alcohol, he was able to keep in himself the habit of thrift and had some savings for a rainy day. He also did not drink the only valuable thing. He still owned an ancient cross with a chain, which he had inherited from his mother. He sold it when the money ran out and his patient needed a huge amount of money for rehabilitation and care. He once thought he would be found dead with this cross. He would never give it up or sell it under any circumstances. This object was the one thing that connected him to his past life, where Mr. Matthew Pattison was a respected man, an associate professor in a department, deputy head of a hospital department, a loving and beloved husband and son. But how did his life change the day he returned from the hospital to collect a patient's chart he had been working on at home and found his wife and friend? That day, when he became an accidental witness to a crime, all his ideas about life, his principles and meanings all abruptly vanished somewhere. Now he was happy to sell the cross and do good. It seemed impossible to do otherwise. All the while the doctor was selflessly doing his work, remembering all the things he tried to forget. His patient looked at him and watched him with beautiful gray-green eyes. She looked at him every second he was with her. It was evident that the grief she remembered was so great that she could not bring herself to speak, in spite of all the kindness and warmth she received every day from her savior. One day, having finished his gymnastics with the patient, Mr. Matthew Pattison went to boil her some chicken broth. Despite the already protracted period of rehabilitation and the excessive care and guardianship, the woman was still in an extremely weak state. When the doctor returned with a plate of flavorful chicken broth on a tray, he was surprised. His patient usually dozed off after the grueling physical exertion she needed to rehabilitate her condition. But here she looked at him with wide-open eyes full of tears and suddenly said, "I've lost a child." Mr. Pattison almost knocked over a bowl of hot soup in surprise. Keeping his composure, he found the strength to place the plate carefully on the stool that served as his nightstand and table at the same time. "I'm sorry for your loss," said the doctor with a sigh. "I'm sorry I examined you, but you were not abused. Nor was there any sign that you had a miscarriage. I don't know what else to say." He continued to stare intently and sympathetically at the stranger who had become his dearest person, the meaning of his hitherto meaningless life. Paying no attention to the reaction and words of her interlocutor, turning to the emptiness inside herself, she continued, "Oh yeah. She was 2 months old, sudden infant death syndrome. I've been cursed since that day." Although she spoke detachedly and without emotion, large tears rolled down her cheeks in hailstones after she finished her sentence. Mr. Pattison realized that her little girl, her daughter, had died of sudden infant death syndrome, a phenomenon about which little is known in modern science. Simply a baby under a year-old stops breathing and dies. The causes of this phenomenon have not yet been discovered. As a doctor, he realized that the woman was in a state of post-traumatic stress disorder. Apparently, one terrible psychological trauma was superimposed on another, no less dangerous for the psyche and for health in general. Having realized that it was pointless to answer, as the patient could not hear him and was talking to herself, he simply put his hand on her arm. Surprisingly, the patient jerked in surprise, lowered her gaze, but did not remove his hand. It was their first conversation, an attempt at communication. A fragile thread of trust began to form. And for his part, Mr. Matthew Pattison was making a great effort not to cut it off, but to strengthen it without outwardly showing emotion or curiosity. He was sinking more and more into speculation as to what had happened. All that was known was that his patient had been pregnant, had given birth to a child, and 2 months later her daughter had died of sudden infant death syndrome. The second was that his patient had been horribly beaten, abused, and mutilated. This was done by a man with a clearly disturbed psyche who enjoyed it all, judging by the nature of the injuries. It appears that they tried to kill her, and perhaps even thought they had killed her. Thirdly, she was brought in her huge jeep to the dump by the local town landlord, a very rich and powerful man called Mr. John Stone, and threw her out like a dog. How interconnected is all of this? Whether and what these events had to do with each other, no one knew, except the silent patient herself. As the labor of curing and nursing became less strenuous and ceased to occupy all Mr. Pattison's thoughts, he began to think more and more about the situation that had occurred. No matter how hard he tried to piece together a coherent story that would more or less explain everything, nothing worked. He would never question a patient in such a state. It could definitely harm her, have a negative impact on both her physical and psycho-emotional state. It could destroy the fragile trust that had been built up between them, and then it would have been impossible to get her to talk, and the rehabilitation period would have increased many times over. So we just had to be patient and wait. A few weeks after the rescued woman spoke of her daughter. Not a word but thank you as he fed her and changed her clothes did the doctor hear from her. Sometimes it seemed like forever. More than 2 months had passed since that October night when Mr. Pattison had picked her up at the dumpster. It was the 14th of December on the calendar. The doctor carefully tore off the sheets each morning to keep track of the passage of time. Since his life had taken another turn and changed course, he had picked up many new habits, and some were simply resumed from a past life, like keeping a calendar and shaving every day. Standing at the sink, he performed his morning routine. He tore off a calendar page, starting a new day, and began to prepare everything he needed for shaving. Suddenly a voice sounded behind him, the timbrine sound of which he had already forgotten. Today is my daughter, Mia's, birthday. Today would have been her 1-year birthday. A year ago on this day I was the happiest woman in the world. All I can think about is what I did wrong to make my life turn from the peak of my happiness to absolute misery. But even at this point, the torrent of unhappiness has not left me. Mr. Matthew Pattison had long ago decided that when she spoke, he would be sure to ask her what her name was and introduce himself. Regardless of what she said or how offhanded his remark would be, he was tired of addressing her to himself as either patient or unfortunate. He even thought about giving her some sort of name to call her by, but changed his mind, finding it disrespectful. Taking a breath for courage and gathering his wits, he blurted out the text he had prepared in his head weeks ago and kept repeating to himself. My name is Mr. Matthew Pattison. That was my name back in the day, and I was a doctor in a rehab center. Now I'm mostly just Matt, an alcoholic who has slipped to the point of being homeless. On the night of 9/10 October, I found you in a dumpster in the town of Sviblov, where I saw you brought and dumped by Mr. John Stone. From that day on, I did everything I could to keep you alive, and I'm glad I helped you. How are you feeling? What's your name? He seemed to forget how to breathe when he said it. He said it without turning to her, fearing he wouldn't be able to say anything if he saw those eyes full of pain. Counting to 10, he decided it was time to turn round and see the reaction his words produced. But as soon as he turned round, she spoke. I realize that I am now indebted to you. I don't think I'm fully recovered yet. Not mentally, not physically. I realize that you are very interested to know my story, how what happened that led me to the rubbish dump where you rescued me. Please give me a little more time. I think I've just been able to start formulating something about and for myself. I'll be sure to tell you everything if you want me to." But a little later she said in a quiet and surprisingly calm voice, "My name is Mary," she added quietly. The pleased Mr. Matthew Pattison could not find anything to say to her, but only smiled softly and quietly. It seemed to him that this would be the best way to show that he was not rushing her and was willing to wait until she was ready. Their life and communication had changed somewhat since then. They were still able to exchange a few everyday phrases of politeness. Mary began to get out of bed and to sit for long periods in a chair by the window, looking out, but she did not express any desire to get out of the house to get some air. Mr. Pattison understood that psychologically his house had become a place of strength for her, a place of refuge from all adversity, and she could not bring herself to leave it in such a state, even for a short walk. With the same calmness and in the same good-natured atmosphere, they celebrated the new year. Since there was no television in the house, there was a library of works of Russian and foreign classics. That's what the occasional neighbors did on long winter evenings, sit and read books. When Mr. Pattison went out of the house to the local village shop, he always overheard idle conversations that he had never cared for before. He felt that Mr. Stone must be looking for Mary dead or alive. This was very disturbing, for the doctor realized that he had no resources to protect her. One evening of the New Year's holiday, once again the power went out, and Mary, quite unexpectedly for Mr. Pattison, and for herself as well, which was noticeable, began to talk to him. "You know, I've always been a good girl from a good family. I was given the usual future in my circle marriage to a nice bloke from our circle, a couple of children. Everything probably should have gone according to plan, for I was not distinguished by a cheerful temperament and the typical exuberant adolescence of teenagers. I went to grammar school, went to art and music school, came home to a loving mom and dad, and no scandals, no arguments, no fights. I read about such things in newspapers and saw in popular talk shows. But there were no such problems among my acquaintances. No one drank or cheated. Everyone around me respected and loved each other. We spent all our holidays together," Mary continued. "Mom didn't work. She did the housework, but not to the detriment of her development. Dad could afford to support us and the domestic helpers. We didn't have excessive consumption or golden toilets, as was fashionable at the time. In general, a quiet existence of a cell of society. Everything collapsed at one moment, when my mummy was given a terrible diagnosis, protecting me to the end, despite my older teenage years. My parents did not inform me of it and hid everything to the last, citing fatigue and autumn moping. Mum was thinning, her face gaunt. She cut her gorgeous curly hair into a short man's haircut. Even then, it didn't make me suspicious. I guess it was because I was raised in safety and didn't feel the need to overshadow my childhood and adolescence. Mum's death I had to accept and feel not like Dad's in 6 months, but at an accelerated pace in a week, namely 6 days. It became pointless and impossible to hide it. Mum was taken to a hospice for palliative care. There was no hope. Lung cancer. Mum and Dad never smoked, though. Such a mockery of fate. And the first blow for me personally is that everything around me is not perfect," Mary said bitterly. "Fortunately, if I may say so, about the death of another person, however inevitable it was, Mummy did not suffer much and left quickly. Daddy and I rallied around the loss of a loved one. It's now I realize how lucky I was then. It could have gone much worse. But fate, having struck me, seemed to wave to me again with a smile. Again, everything went according to the scenario that was prepared for me from birth. I graduated from school and entered the faculty of teaching at the university without any problems. What bad choice for a girl from a good family." Mary grinned with a chuckle. A classic. And of course, it was not about a grandiose career in the field of national pedagogy. I was supposed to be able to work to earn my own petty cash, or at least have the knowledge to raise my own children adequately and thoroughly, Mary said. In her sophomore year, Kyle came into her life, positive from every angle. An engineer whose career was gaining momentum. Mary's dad and his family were thrilled with their union. Young, healthy, happy. Their whole lives ahead of them. What more could you ask for? In her 4th year, she got married. Everything was going according to plan. Another blow took Mary by surprise. A year and a half after the wedding, when she graduated from university, and they began to work closely on planning the expansion of their still small family, no one had diagnosed her with infertility. But a whole professor, a medical doctor, explained that she would have difficulty conceiving and carrying a child on her own. It was a thunderbolt. Where would such problems come from? Mary was outraged. The pre-pregnancy treatment process took 4 years. I lived in clinics, antenatal clinics, hospitals. I don't think there was a doctor I didn't consult. I flew to Germany and Israel. Everything was fine with Kyle, and IVF was recommended to me. Despite my never-ending desire to have a baby, I adamantly denied hormonal stimulation until I found out Kyle had started cheating on me, a young intern at his firm. That's when I realized I cared more about my family and decided to take the risk. I never told Kyle I found out about his cheating. What's the point? We're all good at psychology now. Back then, I went to endless counseling sessions and worked through my issues. And I was sure without a doubt that this cheating was a realization of masculinity, an attempt to prove that he was capable of anything, a manifestation of masculine dignity. I am still grateful to him for going with me all the way, all the clinics, all the procedures and ultrasounds. At all important stages, Kyle was always with Mary. After the final decision to undergo IVF, Kyle even broke up with his young mistress. He endured Mary's whims and tantrums, 2 failed IVF attempts, tears and sobs. 1 pregnancy just didn't happen. The second time, the embryo stopped developing in the 6th week of pregnancy. 3 weeks of happiness from the moment I found out I was pregnant to the ultrasound when I was told the baby was gone, Mary said. It feels like being thrown from the 10th floor onto the tarmac. Even breathing is unbearably painful. It feels like everything inside, all the bones are broken. 3rd attempt. Mary prayed to all the gods and put candles to all the saints. I think I prayed day and night, and in my sleep, she recalled. The pregnancy came and went well until the 4th month. Early in the morning, I woke up with an unbearable pain in my lower abdomen, a miscarriage. How I survived it, I don't even remember. I remember the IVs and the worried faces of my dad, Kyle, and his parents. I know you want to judge Kyle for having an affair, Mary continued. But even if he was to blame, the support and love he gave me at that time in my life made it all worth it. On top of that, my health was pretty badly compromised by the amount of drugs and hormones I was taking. I had to accept that there would be no more IVF courses and that Mary would have to undergo a rather difficult period of rehabilitation. She spent 4 months in a regional boarding house where she was treated and recuperated. Again, a big thank you to my family for their support, Mary said. Thanks to them, I began to slowly come round and find the strength to move on with my life. The day before Mary was discharged, Kyle's parents were involved in a car accident. The terrible accident, caused by a drunk driver, took the lives of 2 people who had become her family. Kyle's mother, Mrs. Jennifer, was so affectionate, caring and understanding to Mary that in a way she replaced her own mother. For a year after their deaths, Mary and Kyle existed on autopilot. He went to work, she did something around the house. There were some chores and worries, but they never seemed to laugh once in the entire year, sullen and tired from all the hardships. That's how I would describe this period of my life, Mary recalled. The day passed, and well. Every day, I lay in the darkness of the marital bedroom where Kyle and I had once shared many beautiful moments, with only a thin ray of light shining through the tightly drawn curtains. I hardly ate, read anything, or turned on the huge plasma TV on the wall. I lay in the semi-darkness of the room and thought about nothing. I tried not to let a single thought enter my head, because then each one would echo with unbearable pain in my wounded heart and make me feel even worse. Kyle would leave for work every morning and return exactly 40 minutes after the end of the workday, which was the amount of time it took to get from work to home. He would return and lie down on the couch in the living room. Mary would lie in the bedroom, and he would lie in the living room. Once in a while, they would exchange the necessary household phrases, and that was all. Kyle was a shadow of the man Mary had married, and she was no better. It was as if they had gone into hibernation, into anabiosis, to try as much as possible to preserve, to accumulate all the vitality they had left after all their troubles. Sometimes it seemed like forever, that Mary and Kyle could never bring themselves to go back to their past lives. Suddenly one evening, Kyle didn't go straight to his favorite couch after coming home from work, but went into the bedroom and talked to Mary, which was surprising in itself. "We can't go on like this," Kyle said. "We have us, and we should thank the Almighty for that. Yes, after all the losses we've suffered, the pain that has come over us. It's not easy to go back to our past lives, but we have to try, for the sake of my mother's and father's memory, and for the sake of our unborn son. Then it became clear that this was not a sudden monologue as Mary had initially thought. At lunchtime, in order to keep communication with his colleagues to a minimum, Kyle began to visit a psychologist who had an appointment in the same business center, where Kyle's firm was located. I have to admit, his words had a profound effect on me, Mary recalled. I had never looked at the situation from the point of view that I would be ashamed in front of my family and friends who were not around. But what a life I lead. Sort of in remembrance of them, I became very ashamed of my mother, and of Mrs. Jennifer, my mother-in-law, and of my son, whom I couldn't even bury. That sudden evening dialogue with Kyle and then therapy with a psychoanalyst helped us a lot. Mary and Kyle began to come back to life. Yes, slowly, but it was already a huge step. On the recommendation of the psychologist the two of them started seeing, they decided to go on holiday. Given the life they had been leading for the last year, and to be honest, Mary personally for the last 3, they realized they needed a reboot. It seemed that the sea air and sunshine would help rehabilitate their emotional state. If I had known how this trip was going to end, I would have been better off killing myself straight away, Mary said. Why do grief and unhappiness come at a time when you are happy? The highest point of life satisfaction is followed by absolute and unbearable unhappiness. They decided to fly to Italy. They spent a long time choosing hotels, excursions and leisure activities that kept them busy and distracted them from their usual thoughts. Finally, everything was ready. Making their own travel arrangements distracted and mobilized them. Mary and Kyle began to socialize more, talking more than out of sheer necessity. The holiday started off beautifully. They did a lot of walking, sunbathing, swimming, touring local attractions, and even socializing with other tourists. It was amazing how each day the ice wall between them grew thinner and thinner. They shut off from the rest of the world by the dome, began to film it for the rest of the world and for each other. It was as if they were on their honeymoon. Mary and Kyle were getting reacquainted with each other, holding hands, needing each other. Another evening after the tour was spent at a fancy restaurant. After a delicious dinner and a few glasses of delicious Italian wine, Mary and Kyle decided to end the evening with a walk along the beach. They walked and enjoyed the sea, the unbearably beautiful sunset, and each other's long-forgotten company. They seemed to remember why they loved each other and began to realize that they were not ready to give up what was between them and what was still possible in the future. The breathtakingly beautiful tale of that night ended expectantly with intimacy. They hadn't been together since the night Mary lost the baby. It was a night of love and magic. It seemed like that magic would last forever. That night changed everything. They returned from their holiday a different person, not even the same person who was then expecting a baby, a long-awaited baby. After so many years of waiting and failed attempts, renewed versions of new happiness, they couldn't get enough of each other, and it seemed that the world consisted of the two of them. No one else was needed. They were happy absolutely and unconditionally. A month after they returned from Italy, Mary was flying on the wings of love. And so was Kyle. She'd never seen him so happy. The morning sickness caught her off guard. She was completely unprepared for it. Her mind just collapsed. The thought of being pregnant was something she just hadn't allowed for. She was prepared immediately for the worst. The certainty that she would be taken by the disease that was coming for her mother became her obsession. The neurosis was getting worse, and she kept winding herself up. Mummy had a hereditary form of cancer, and I refused to take tests and markers to find out if I had got this genetic bomb, because I was afraid of going mad when I heard the disappointing diagnosis Mary recalled, plus hormone therapy and support for IVF. I couldn't think of anything good. I was sure I was dying. She forced herself to go to the doctor just to find out how much time she had left. I wanted to prepare Kyle for another loss. She wanted to finish all the things she'd started, to take stock of her life. She rejected the treatment right away, even without a doctor's consultation. I saw how hard Mummy had to go, despite the expensive and painful treatment. How she suffered, Mary said. I didn't want to torture myself, Kyle, and my dad. Making my father go through this a second time. Unbearable and unimaginable. She spent a long time going to her GP to be referred to a more specialist based on her test results for a consultation. Twice she canceled the appointment, and once she ran right out of the lobby of the private health clinic where she had an appointment. Fear haunted Mary every day. She felt worse and worse. The nausea wouldn't let up. The only thing that made her gather all her remaining strength and go to the doctor was when her husband Kyle became suspicious and asked her how she was feeling. By the time she talked to him and had a final explanation, she wanted to know all the details and timelines. God only knew what she was going through and how to muster the courage and strength to walk into the doctor's office. She sank down on the chair in front of him and cried. She couldn't hold back her tears any longer. For about 15 minutes, they tried to calm her down and give her water so that she could tell him what she had come in with. When the tears finally stopped and the sedative drops had taken effect, she said to the doctor in a quiet voice, "I am dying and I want to know when." I think the doctor himself was taken aback. Such patients apparently were not often in his competence. Now I even think that he wanted to escort her to the other wing of the clinic, where private psychiatry was located. Pulling himself together, the doctor began to question her about the symptoms of her mysterious illness. After listening to her to the end, the doctor gave her a full-mouth smile, which she found extremely offensive. "I actually came for a terminal diagnosis and was planning to pass away soon," Mary said. Continuing to smile, the doctor opened his desk drawer and started rummaging through it. After a few seconds, he placed a rapid pregnancy test in front of her and said, "I think you should take the test to determine your due date more accurately. I recommend you take a HCG blood test. But based on your symptoms and some of the outward signs I'm seeing, I'm willing to bet my head that you're pregnant." That's the last thing she remembered. Next thing you know, she's waving a fan and smelling a pungent odor. Turns out she fainted. Mary never for a second allowed herself to think she might be pregnant. Firstly, the initial difficulties with conception she later recalled, plus the diagnosis. Secondly, even the treatment didn't help us. Mom's medical history, our long-term depression. Mary could have suspected anything, but certainly not pregnancy. The doctor wouldn't risk letting her go into the ladies' room alone. He gave her a nurse to accompany her. She couldn't go on her own. She used to think that like a bag of dust was a beautiful phraseology, but it really wasn't. A very understandable condition for her now. Overwhelming to the extreme, the mixture of feelings and emotions that came over her was simply inexpressible in words. 10 minutes later, they were back in the office. The nurse practically carried her on her back, for her legs were almost weakened with joy. "I'm pregnant," Mary said. A complex range of feelings and emotions. She was immediately given an ultrasound and heard her baby's heartbeat for the first time. As it turned out, it was timely, given her diagnosis, previous problems with conception, and the course of the pregnancy. The decision was made to put her in hospital for preservation. She will never forget Kyle's emotion and voice when she called him from the ambulance and said, "I need some personal items as I'm being put on conservatorship." Pause. A few rhetorical questions, and then screaming, crying, and exclamations of absolute happiness. He reached the hospital at the same time as she was being taken by ambulance. How happy he was. It wasn't until a few days later that Mary realized their happiness. Although her pregnancy had not been easy, she had been kept in labor. Toxicosis plagued her throughout her pregnancy. Every other day she was given very painful drips, from which all the veins disappeared. But it was nothing. She was absolutely and infinitely happy. A month and a half later, they found out they were having a girl and immediately decided on the name Mia. Mia was a beautiful and holy name, like a patron saint for their little girl's amulet. Kyle ran around the baby shops and seemed to have bought up the entire range: 2 cots, several prams, tons of toys, and everything needed to care for a baby. When he visited her at the hospital every day after work, they laughed that if this kept up, they would have to buy a new flat to store all the goodies he had acquired. In the 38th week of her pregnancy, her stomach began to pull unbearably, and Mary asked her obstetrician-gynecologist to be the one to call, even though it was night time. Despite the happiness that enveloped her, the anxiety wouldn't let go. All the negative experiences and all the previous losses were weighing on her, even though she was careful to keep them away. Knowing her, their history, Kyle and her father, the doctor flew to the hospital 20 minutes later, did a cursory examination, and said, "It is necessary to perform an emergency C-section. There is life-threatening danger to both you and your daughter." Mary made the decision not to bother either her husband or her dad, to resign herself to fate and tell the facts their nerves and worry would change nothing, but only hurt the staff and themselves. At 6:05, Mary became a happy mom. The most beautiful daughter in the world. 51 centimeters, 3 kilograms and 60 grams. "My happiness just couldn't fit inside me," she said. If there is an infinite, dimensionless and absolute happiness in life, she experienced it then. That day at the discharge from the maternity hospital, her father furtively wiped away tears, and her husband cried and was not even going to hide it. It seems that this moment was the happiest in the life of each of them. It took them more than 2 hours to get home, because Kyle was driving 20 kilometers per hour in the leftmost lane and refused to increase the speed. Happiness was new to them. They went to it for so long, fought so hard for it, that they simply could not lose it and did everything to prevent it from happening. As it turned out, it was in vain. Their fate reminded them again that not everything is in their hands, that nothing depends on them. All their control and attempt to manage life processes is an empty endeavor. On the 16th of February, when their daughter Mia was 2 months and 2 days old, she did not wake up. She simply forgot how to breathe and her heart stopped. There are no words to describe their grief. Just as there were no words to describe their happiness when she was born, there are absolute grief now. It is hard to imagine the existence of a person whom Mary would wish to go through it. Nor had they gone through it, not her, not Kyle, not her father. They crawled because it broke them not in half, but into hundreds of millions of little pieces. They were all together. They had only them in the whole world, and the center of their world was their baby, their little Mia. With her gone, it was as if the magnet that pulled the three of them together around her was gone. The pain of her leaving was unbearable and unending. And it wasn't just her they'd lost. They began to lose each other and themselves. "Mr. Matthew, it's morning," Mary stammered. "Do you want to know the whole story now?" He could not answer at once. He sat and furtively wiped away his tears. He didn't have children, as it happened, but the way Mary told it, the way she looked at him, it would have moved a stone. Mr. Matthew was in a lot of pain and fear. He realized that this was not the end. After all, there was something else that had brought her to the ill-fated junkyard in the boot of the local authorities' car. "Mary, I don't want to force you to do anything," the doctor finally found himself. "As you see fit, based on your feelings." "All right, then I'll tell you the whole story at once. It won't hurt me anymore. I was already dead then, that morning of the 16th of February. A silence fell over them. Mary was gathering her thoughts to continue her monologue, and Mr. Matthew was thinking what a scoundrel he was. He dared to feel sorry for himself. "Oh my God," he reasoned to himself. "How could you, a healthy grown man, break down like that over such a trifle, such a trifle?" The woman left. So what? She cheated, she betrayed him, her friend betrayed her. And what did you do better for anyone? Maybe to yourself that after that you started betraying yourself, drowning in your grief at the bottom of a bottle. He looked at his life from the outside and was horrified at what had broken him. He felt so sorry for himself. Is it really true? His self-abuse was interrupted by Mary's voice. 16th February. Yes, but that was the day my life collapsed. It's terrible that I remember every detail, every second, like in slow motion. As a psychiatrist later explained to me, this phenomenon is called psyche, a special neurological condition that can be caused, among other things, by a particularly traumatic situation. Oh yeah, that was the situation. And it couldn't get any worse. Mary remembered everything. The eyes of the ambulance doctor, the tears of the nurse, the sympathetic apology of the police officers who had to question them about the circumstances of the incident. She remembered the report the medical examiner had given them and his lengthy explanation that no one was insured. It happens. And so they entered this sad but commonplace statistic. The hardest for Mary was the moment of the funeral. She remembered her mum's funeral, her mother-in-law's funeral, and her father-in-law's funeral. But her daughter's death hurt deeply then, terribly intense pain. But these were people who had lived a life. As she stood over the grave, which was tiny with a small headstone, all in flowers and toys, it shouldn't be like that. It was impossible for it to be like that. Like Mary had said after the funeral, which with their troubles had kept them at least somewhat together and forced them to coordinate and talk, Dad, Kyle and her had withdrawn into themselves. They had simply become strangers to each other. With Kyle, each was living their own grief and no one wanted to share it, each protecting it from the other. We didn't talk to my husband about our daughter's death after her funeral, Mary said. I don't know what we were thinking, that it might smooth things over. That silence was the answer. Dad would call sometimes asking how we were. Yes, how we were. We were alive and we weren't happy about it. That's how we were. The cruelty and injustice was killing me. I was given and immediately taken away, as if some sadist was having fun with me in secret. We spent 2.5 months in silence. Kyle took a holiday and sat on the couch like he did then, and Mary lay in her bedroom with the blinds drawn. All the happiness we'd been given had taken more than we'd given, ripped it out with a piece of heart. Then we existed like that for a year. I realized I don't want to be like that anymore. I don't want to be the naive person who hopes again and goes after a phantom dream. I realized I had to break it off. I called my father and asked his permission to stay at his house in Seattle, a remote gated community where no one cares about anyone. Perfect for a voluntary hermit. I remember gaining the strength to talk to my husband. It was much calmer than I expected. Maybe we just didn't have the energy to make a scene, to be nervous, to worry. Kyle, I want to leave. I can't go on like this, I said. You're a very good man, and I'll always be grateful for everything we've had, for your help in those moments of happiness. I no longer want to wait for happiness like manna from heaven, to enjoy it, and then physically feel that I have to recover again from grief, from myself, from everyday worries after another disaster. It's petty, selfish, and cowardly. But I want to escape from everything, including myself. Please give me that opportunity. Without judging me, let me go. And he let go. Thank him for that. He didn't push me, he didn't beg me. I couldn't take it, I couldn't resist. I just didn't have the strength for it. That's how I ended up here in this village. Mary was silent, and for the first time since she had begun to share the tragic story of her life with a complete stranger, she stood up. She went to the cooker, lit the gas, and poured water into the kettle. Would you like tea or coffee? She asked. Yes, please, Mary. Tea, Mr. Matthew Pattison said almost immediately. He realized that she had passed one milestone and was preparing for the second. According to her, of course, nothing could be worse than her daughter's death. And there was no arguing with that. What happened to her, however, happened to her. Somehow she herself had ended up dying in a rubbish dump, and someone had done it to her. And he was sure that this pain had not yet subsided either, and had brought her huge scars on her heart that had just begun to heal. The old man's heart clenched at the memory of the condition in which he had found her, and how much effort he had put in, so that now, nearly 4 months later, Mary could stand and walk unsupported. Mary, standing over the kettle, thought for a moment. She was working out in her head the chronology and the important details of what she wanted to tell this kind old man, how she had ended up in the unfortunate cellar, and how she had pretended to be dead to survive against all odds. The kettle whistled on the cooker and made Mary snap out of her reverie, out of the thoughts that plagued her. Removing the kettle from the cooker, she stirred the boiling water into mugs, poured the brew, and, limping slightly, went to the table, placing a cup in front of Mr. Matthew Pattison. She went on to recount what had happened to her. As you probably know, real estate is extremely expensive in Seattle, and there are only a few houses where people live all year round, Mary said. Mostly everyone comes on weekends or holidays. And then there are the security guards who walk around the community in these gated homes where the owners have deemed their presence necessary, and the endless house helpers. When I arrived with 1 suitcase of belongings and 2 bags of groceries, I heard a ringing silence, no voices or sounds, and therefore no people. It was what I needed in the state of mental turmoil I was in. Dad called me every day at first. Apparently he was very worried that I might do something to myself, but every day my voice got more cheerful, and I guess that calmed him down. At first he kept threatening to come over, or at least to send Jess, his constant housekeeper, to help me clean up the house. There hadn't been anyone for over a year, as my father only came up there on holiday to fish in the quiet of the river. He missed this year's holiday because he was with me all the time. I was in hospital at the time, and he came and entertained me. I arrived, and for the first few days I started tidying up and general cleaning on my own. Things that Jess hadn't had time to clean in the few days that Daddy allotted her, giving her an ultimatum that he was going fishing. The quiet and physical activity began to heal me little by little. Seemingly daily, tired from doing so many things, I stopped hearing my incessant thoughts and had a dialogue with my inner self. This was what was needed when the housework was over. The only entertainment left was books. Dad had moved the entire home library here. I realized what I was missing. When I wore myself out physically, my body channeled all its resources into recovery. And I had no time to think. As I said at the beginning, my parents were very active in developing me as a child, taking me to music and art school. But sport for a girl at that time seemed secondary and optional. There was never a place for serious physical activity in my life, and I decided to fix it. And one May day, the weather was sunny and warm. And I put on shorts, a t-shirt and trainers, and went jogging for the first time. At first, my jogging around the village might have made the occasional spectator laugh. Fortunately, there were none. I ran for a couple of minutes and gasped, then walked for 10 minutes as I had no energy to run. But I didn't give up. Every day I increased the pace and the amount of exertion. For one reason, I was exhausting myself, and at night I fell asleep without dreams, which constantly haunted me, not allowing me to rest even a few hours. I had no dreams, no nightmares, and no creepy night thoughts during bouts of insomnia. For this, I was ready to run and run even faster and even further. Now every day, regardless of the weather or how I felt, started with a run. I ran without looking back, as if I wanted to run away from my past and was very afraid that it would catch up with me. For the rest of May, summer and September, every day was like the other. I would get up in the morning and run through the village along the riverbank, through the forest. No matter how I felt, no matter what weather was waiting outside my window. I would come from my run and read something that had helped me with all my problems since childhood. I would read books and enter another world where there was no me, no my problems. There was a whole other world that I could escape to from all the hustle and bustle. If I felt I wasn't too tired, I would force myself to go out for an evening jog, all just to get through the evening and get through the night. And then the morning. A new day, as they say, the day is done. And thank goodness for that. And that's how I climbed through my life, from one week to the next. And I was grateful for that. I didn't stop being sick, but somehow I lived. I found a way to live. Running hardened and strengthened not only my body but also my spirit. I had never seen such muscles. I lost a lot of weight and muscles were showing all over my body. My stamina surprised me. I was running 20 kilometers a day, and when I ran, I didn't think about anything. It was as if running was my natural form of existence. And if I didn't run, I would fall and die. I couldn't run without it, like I couldn't breathe. The only one of my rare interlocutors was my dad, who no longer called every day but still steadily dialed me once a week to make sure everything was okay. Kyle didn't call me, but a couple of times my dad said my husband called him to check on me. I was eternally grateful to him for being so sensitive and respectful of my request, for preserving the little world I'd created for myself. Sometimes it was very rare for me to leave the gates of the village to go to the shop, and I made do with really little. I shopped at the local small shop on the territory of the settlement. There were two cheerful saleswomen, Meg and Zoe. They tried to talk to me, but gave up, as did the security guys at the checkpoint. I occasionally exchanged a few words with them when I ran past, or on the rare trips out of the grounds. But my main interlocutor was a guard at one of the houses on our street. Mr. Tom, as I had called him since my youth when we bought the house, was an extremely good-natured and quiet, non-elderly man. It is unlikely that his function for the last 10 years was really security. I think the landlord didn't want to dismiss him out of sentimental feelings, and I think Mr. Tom had nowhere else to go. He lived in a small house on the edge of the property, in a hut behind the guest house. Mr. Tom was known for his tact and unobtrusiveness. Perhaps even my father had alerted him to my condition. He kept in touch with him too. Occasionally he'd invite him round for some small jobs. Be that as it may, over the months the not-so-young guard became the person I interacted with the most. A calm and modest man, non-drinker. Contrary to stereotypes, he smiled and greeted me kindly, but never insisted on conversation, though he was happy to keep it going if I stopped to talk. on the very day that you, Mr. Matthew Pattison, found me on the rubbish bin. I took a little rest after lunch and went out for a second run, thinking I wasn't tired enough. I had never run to music. I needed complete silence and no associations, which only made for unnecessary thoughts, which is what I was trying to avoid. Putting on leggings and a t-shirt, I thought it would be chilly even with the intense running, and threw on a windbreaker. As soon as I stepped out of the gate and closed it behind me, I saw Mr. Tom standing in the road looking around. With a quick step to warm up for the run, I walked up to him. "Mr. Tom, what's the matter?" I asked. "Oh, the car gave me a fright." Mr. Tom turned round abruptly, apparently lost in his own thoughts. "Did you see it?" "Mr. John Stone's here," he said. "I don't even know who that is," I wondered. "You don't know who he is?" The old man was surprised. "His house is right by the river, and the fence is so close to the lake that you can't walk along the shore. Though it is forbidden, though he is not allowed to do it." "Of course," I said. "Indeed, there is a house at the end of our street, the richest, and the fence blocks the way. You have to go round this area, and it's huge." "So here you are," said Mr. Tom, clearly wary of the fact. "What's the trouble?" I'd never seen him before, and I've never seen any life in this house, no lights, no sounds. So he's not coming for a long time, and will be gone soon, I surmised. "Yes, he's an unpleasant type, in the old man's way," said the guard. "He supposedly comes with his niece, and every time she's new and looks like that. It's disgusting." "No big deal. It's such a time. Everyone has fun as he wants," I answered. "That's true. But he's a very unpleasant man. When he comes for a couple of days a few times a year, I feel uncomfortable. I can't wait for him to go back to his capital with his niece. I hope he'll have a brief visit this time," as always, said Mr. Tom. "That would be nice," I said, trying to cheer the old man up. "Are you going to run again? You're not taking care of yourself, girl. You've already got one skeleton left of you, and you're studying muscles on it. You're punishing yourself." I didn't want to answer that, nor did I want to develop this thought. So I thought I'd just say goodbye kindly. "Yes, Mr. Tom, I'll be off. It'll be dark soon enough." "Go on, girl, take care of yourself." He waved me off. I began to pick up the pace for a regular run. I didn't have my watch with me. I never took anything with me, not even my keys. I just hid them in the cachepot on the porch. Although, to be honest, that was an unnecessary precaution too. It felt like I'd been gone over an hour. I jogged to the other end of the village, turned a little, ran down a wooded alley, and then decided to walk back along the riverbank. Mr. Tom's wariness surprised me and interested me a little. So I decided to run along the bank to Mr. John Stone's house. What if I saw him or his niece along the river? I made it to the big fence without seeing or hearing anything. I can't say I was too upset about it. I decided to take one last run around his property along the fence, run to the end of our street, and come back at a brisk pace. That's how I like to end my run, rounding a huge metal fence with no gaps. I suddenly noticed that the gate was slightly ajar. A huge SUV was parked in the backyard near the garage exit, and something at the bottom of the boot door caught my eye. I slowed my step and then stopped and began to look closely at the boot. At first I thought I was imagining things, but no. The boot was closed, and there was white hair sticking out of it, and I think there was something red on it. Curious and forgetting about caution, I literally walked into the fenced area like a trance and headed for the boot. As I leaned over, I realized it was hair and not something red, but real blood. I didn't have time to collect my thoughts and come up with a plan. Out of the corner of my ear, I heard a sound, but it was too late. Someone came up behind me and stabbed me in the neck. It took me a while to wake up, apparently. I was in some kind of concreted room with no windows and no sunlight. There was a light bulb directly above me. When I woke up, I felt stiff in my movements. Sure enough, I was sitting on a chair and I was bound. My mouth was also taped shut. There was no one else in the room but me. But as I looked around, I saw a burgundy liquid beside me. On the floor, naturally, was the blood of the girl whose hair had drawn me here. It's hard to describe my emotions at that moment. At first, I began to berate myself and scold myself. I'd have to be so stupid to get caught like that. Where did this curiosity come from? Why did I come in? Why didn't I call for help? Why didn't I expect an attack? Anyway, at first I was restrained by the natural urge of self-preservation instinct. After a short break, the self-abuse mode was replaced by a different attitude. The desire I'd been chasing away since February woke up. I began to think with relief that I would finally be reunited with my little daughter, Mia. And that thought gave me a kind of peace that kept me from panicking and hysterical. I don't know how long I indulged in these thoughts, but suddenly the door opened and an attractive middle-aged man walked in. Average height, stocky, short, but well-groomed and handsome. There was no doubt about it, it was Mr. John Stone. "So we've met," I grinned to myself. "Yeah, you nosy little shit. Are you awake and awake?" said the man in a pleasant baritone. "Why did you come in here? Who asked you to?" He asked questions as if expecting an answer. Though, considering he'd taped my mouth shut, it would be strange to expect any excuses from me. "Maybe it's a good thing I got you," though Mr. John Stone continued. "That wench I brought back didn't amuse me much. I was hoping for a longer conversation, and she spoilt it. The bastard threw herself at the knife on purpose." The smile with which he said those vile things made cold sweat trickle down my back. I really hoped I could pass out. As luck would have it, my body had mobilized and I was more alert than ever. "Before we begin our communication, we need to clarify a few details. Who are you? And who would know you're here?" I realized it wasn't just me I was scared of. It was now clear that Mr. Tom's life was in danger too. As he took a few steps towards me, he jerked the tape sharply. "Answer me, you bitch. I don't like repeating myself twice. You'll be very sorry if you make me show you how much I don't like it." I'm Mary. I wanted to take a moment to collect my thoughts, but I didn't know how to do it safely. "I don't think you realize the gravity of the situation," I said. "Who knows you're here?" The tone with which he said it clearly made it clear that the maniac did not intend to joke. Moreover, he struck my solar plexus with his fist. If my shoulders had not been tightly pressed against the back of the chair, I would have bent double from the pain that pierced my body. Taking a knife out of his pocket, he smiled, brought it up to my face and said, "See what I have. I'm going to stab you with it next, so think carefully before you answer." I guess for him the answer followed too quickly, since he didn't throw another punch. But for me, my life was flashing before my eyes. Before he walked in, I was ready to accept my fate humbly and go to my little daughter Mia. But the moment Mr. John Stone struck and everything went black before my eyes, I remembered another moment of my life quite inappropriately, how Kyle had walked into my bedroom, and we had talked about how we had no right to live like this. That we should remember and live in remembrance of our family and friends who were no longer with us, that they would not be happy to see us like this, that we should live and fight and try to build our lives anew. At that moment, I felt very ashamed in front of my mummy, my unborn son and my daughter Mia, that I could not let myself give up so easily, give myself to this maniac. I needed a chance, even the tiniest one. My instinct for self-preservation rebelled. My mind seemed completely out of control of what I was saying. "I live in the Jackson house. It's my father's, but I live alone. The only person who saw me today was Mr. Tom from next door." I blurted it out and only then realized he wouldn't stop. It's easier for him to take out the hypothetical threat of Mr. Tom to ensure he covers his crimes. Now it made sense to me who the nieces were and why they only came once. "Is that the houseboy who thinks he's a security guard? The old man?" Mr. John Stone was looming over me with a frightful smile that turned my insides upside down. Yes, I had no choice but to confirm what I had already said. "I'll be back soon, baby. Just you wait for me. Really wait for me." He laughed evilly and walked out. Something was drilling into my soul. On the one hand, I was panicking that I had set up a good and kind man who was innocent. On the other hand, having Mr. John Stone around just paralyzed me with fear. I was ready to do anything to make him go away. He was gone indefinitely, so it seemed to me. I hated myself and went through my thoughts as to why I had seen fit to delay my own death at the cost of another man's death while Mr. John Stone was not yet back. I held out hope that I could get out, but as soon as the door slammed shut, I tried to free myself. It was no use. Absolutely pointless. I was duct taped to the chair. Apparently, the previous girl was tied up not so qualitatively, and it spoilt the maniac's holiday. So he tried very hard with me, not making such mistakes. Every arm, every leg was wrapped with several layers of duct tape. My back was tied intentionally too, both around my shoulders and stomach. My thoughts were spinning and spinning, and there was no stopping them. I had never felt like such a creep before. My conscience was working harder than ever. As I went over my options for release, I realized the futility of my attempts. He won't let me go. The fate of all his nieces awaits me. Terror and fear gripped me and ate away at my insides. When Mr. John Stone returned, smiling full mouth, I was exhausted with myself. I didn't have the strength to resist or give in or try to free myself. I decided to take it as it came. I had no way out, and all I was excited about was meeting Mia, my daughter. What I'd have to go through before that seemed like an inevitability. That's it, sweetie. It's just the two of us now, and no one's going to get in our way. He almost sang in his own voice. I noticed blood on the lapel of his tracksuit. It didn't seem to be there when he left. Mr. Tom. The thought that I was responsible for the death of a man, such a good man, suddenly gripped my heart. The pain was unbearable. Apparently, I collapsed from a heart attack. That's all I remember. She didn't say another word, and there was silence. Mr. Matthew Pattison was again wiping away a stingy male tear. He seemed to have cried more this evening and night than he had cried in all his previous life. How had this thin young woman borne it all? Why had she suffered so much evil? This childish and naive thought gave him no rest. His wounded soul demanded justice. If not for himself, then for the other young and innocent. I think it was running that saved me, Mary said suddenly, and the phrase brought Mr. Matthew Pattison out of his trance. Running saved me. Mary continued as if she were talking to herself. The muscles and stamina of my body through exercise have reached a magnitude unprecedented for a woman that Mr. John Stone did not expect. Didn't believe I could survive all those injuries. It's a good thing I don't remember it. I only saw the aftermath when I regained consciousness, thanks to you. And I guess it's no fun playing with a mouse that doesn't react. The equanimity and indifference with which Mary spoke of it shocked the doctor. It was as if she were musing about a football match, something so utterly mediocre and trivial that it was not worthy of the least bit of her attention. Mr. Matthew Pattison's only concern was twofold: why Mary had never decided to contact her husband and father. After all, she could have asked him for the phone a long time ago. And secondly, he wondered if she really blamed herself for Mr. Tom's death. Mr. Matthew Pattison knew him. Tom had gone missing in October, around the same time the doctor had brought a wounded and crippled Mary home. No public attention was drawn to the man's disappearance. He's gone and gone, and that's fine. Now, Mr. Matthew Pattison himself, of course, thought it strange that he had not connected the two facts, though at the time he did not care, as long as he could shelter and protect Mary and help her to get back on her feet. After thinking about it, the doctor made up his mind nevertheless and asked Mary. Asked her both questions. He asked, and Mary was silent. Mr. Matthew Pattison realized that it was impossible, that her psyche wasn't ready yet. Reprimanding himself mentally, he got up from the table and went to the door to give Mary some time to herself. "I'll get that." Her voice caught him off guard. "First to the second question, if you don't mind, as it will partly be the answer to the first." Mr. Matthew Pattison walked on in silence and sat down in his seat. "You see," Mary went on, "I've been thinking about this all the time I've been with you. Is it my fault? Yes and no. I suppose there are people who would have died but would have protected an old man in the same situation, hidden it. And there are people who wouldn't have needed that blow. They told and showed everything at once. But one should blame first of all the person who forces these people, puts them in these circumstances. I have come to this conclusion. It was that guilt that was eating me up. I am the victim who wanted to shoulder the entire load of guilt and drive it on myself, giving up my father just to hurt myself more, to punish myself even more. It's only in the last few days that something clicked in me and I realized that, firstly, by refusing to communicate and not letting my father know where I am, I'm hurting him, not myself. And secondly, I want to do everything I can to make sure that the really guilty one is held accountable for what he has done. Mr. Pattison, it's dawn. I think it's time for us to get out of the house and make some calls. Of course, I want to call my dad first, but then I want to call law enforcement as well. Tell me, can I ask you to not only help me with this, but ask you to continue to be my guardian angel, to come to town with me and live with us as a friend, as a good angel? I see that you are punishing yourself for something too. And I want to thank you by doing something for you. You saved my life. I know you sold that image of Mum's to cure me. I heard you talking to yourself when you thought I was unconscious. I'll never forget that. Mary looked at the old man with tears in her eyes and waited for his answer. He looked at her, crying and smiling. They left the house together and, holding hands, went to the nearest neighbors, from whom they could ask to transfer to Mr. Matthew Pattison Ruhr 100 for the telephone, which he had again forgotten to pay. The man never recognized bank cards, considering them too insistent a manifestation of capitalism. "Hello, Dad, it's me, Mary," she said into the receiver. And tears of happiness flowed down her cheeks again. "Daughter," she heard the man's excited voice in reply. He could not believe his ears, as he was sure that he would never hear or see his daughter again. "I've got the police on my ear," he continued. "We've been looking for you for so long. Where are you? What's wrong with you? Do you need any help?" Mary's family had been worried since the day she stopped contacting them. They immediately contacted the police, but for a long time the search was fruitless. It was only after they found a man in a wooded area who could barely move, sleeping in a small hut and covering a wound that had not yet fully healed with his own piece of trousers, that things started to move. How Mr. Tom had survived was a great mystery, but it was he who had helped to arrest Mr. John Stone, the man who had tortured and destroyed innocent girls for years. "Oh, come on," exclaimed Mary, unable to believe what she had just heard. "Mr. John Stone is in prison?" "Yes, my daughter, yes," replied the father. "Come home." Mary made up with Kyle, who had been at odds with her since her disappearance. Mr. Matthew Pattison was finally back to normal and was even able to return to his medical practice. The case involving Mr. John Stone received huge publicity, and the doctor who saved the woman became a prominent figure. Despite his difficult reputation, Mr. Matthew Pattison received job offers from several hospitals and chose the one he liked. Mary and Kyle took Mr. Tom, and after he was discharged from the hospital, he was still working as a security guard, only now in a safe environment. And a few months after everything happened, Mary and Kyle learned the happy news that she was expecting a baby again, and once again she couldn't find a place to be with worry and excitement. But it was all in vain. The pregnancy was surprisingly easy, and when the due date came, a long-awaited daughter was born, whom the happy parents named Mia. "It was a gift from fate," said Mary through her tears. "It's your reward," replied Kyle. "Your reward for not giving up, for everything you've been through, and a little bit of mine." Hugging his wife tightly, Kyle looked lovingly at Mia sleeping in her cot. And for the first time in a long time, he and Mary believed that there was happiness after all.